Welcome, everyone. Please be advised that the Township of Wilmot Special Council meeting of April 4th, 2022 is now back in session after being recessed. We will reread the territorial acknowledgement and then resume where we recessed on April 4. Again, Councillor Gordick has declared a conflict of interest with regards to this matter. As such, she is not in attendance at this meeting. Ask Councillor Fisher to now read the territorial acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, sir. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Pardon me, Mayor Armstrong.
Yes.
Before we begin the business of the meeting, oh, my apologies. I got mixed up with the previous meeting with the suspension of the rules. Sorry, my apologies for interrupting.
Not a problem. Are there any other conflicts of interest to be declared? No. So we will continue on with the zone change application, and we have a few comments from CAO Chambers.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the public. I just wanted to give a quick reminder to delegates this evening to please be mindful of the time allotted for your presentation and to focus on your key points or concerns or comments that haven't yet been raised. If someone else has shared your point of view already, we ask that you simply tell us if you support or do not support the application, and we will record your opinion. We also ask that members of council limit their comments following each delegation to questions of clarification only to ensure that we have a chance to hear all delegations this evening before council moves on to debate the matter and render your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chambers. We will continue to hear from the remaining delegations in the original order in which they registered. Before commencing with the hearing from the delegations, I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. Delegations will be allotted 7 minutes to speak. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast live via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate muting and removal from the meeting: interrupting councillor, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillor, staff, or others, hate speech, or defamatory comments. Mr. David Sisko and Mr. Rick Espela are in attendance to respond to any questions of council for the applicant, but they will not be readdressing council. I will now call upon the delegations. First delegation is Steph Gertz. Not here. Okay, apparently Ms. Gertz has not arrived. So next is Simone Philpott.
Great.
Okay, welcome, Simone. Go ahead, you have your 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor Armstrong, councillors, and everyone who's attending today. I'm Simone Philpott. I'm a researcher at the University of Waterloo, In my work, I investigate conflicts. So put simply, I research difficult decisions involving more than one person or groups who have different perspectives, goals, or objectives. So because of that interest, I began looking into the decisions surrounding the Holman Pit application back in about 2019. And I recently published an academic article addressing that situation. So today I'm going to very quickly highlight some selected key observations I made, and at any time by email or now, I'm also happy to answer questions or dig deeper into anything that may be useful to you. The observations that I'm going to share come from the 2 years I spent investigating this decision process to gain an understanding of the situation, with particular attention paid to the preferences of the people and the groups who were involved. Now, during my research, in order to conduct it, I consulted many sources to understand the Holman Pit application and the situation holistically. So available emails that were posted online by, say, the Canadian Environmental Law Association, policy and legal documents, newspaper articles, including opinion pieces and those written by professional journalists who'd taken an interest in the topic, and of course, attending community organizations, meetings, and other meetings by the proponent and township council. So during that work, I made many observations and synthesized what I saw and heard so that I could analyze it using the specific methods from my discipline. Now, because of this, I recorded many of the concerns that you heard about the last time that we met at the last meeting, and would have synthesized at the same time some of the concerns you may hear from the community moving forward. Overall, through the research process, the picture that I got from my time studying this issue is that many residents in this community that I spoke to or that I saw at these meetings, whose material I engaged with, they felt very strongly that this pit will negatively affect their community and their quality of life. They've articulated that in a range of forums, including the meetings, news media, and of course at this venue. Now, one thing that I did as part of my research is to collect these many documents and transcribed interviews, and I looked in these sources of information for patterns in what was said. So in sources where community perspectives were raised, like newspaper articles and town hall meetings and council meetings and transcribed interviews I performed, I kept track of what concerns were raised in each document and in how many documents they were raised in. So some of the top concerns that I encountered through this research were, of course, water-related issues, which concern about water was raised in about 21 documents from my sample. After that, air quality was discussed in 16 documents from my sample. Traffic and dust concerns were recorded in 12 of the documents. And I think at this point, based on what was heard last week and what we have coming up over the next little time, I won't go through the full list of concerns that I documented, as you've already heard many of them last time from the residents themselves. But just to say that throughout the time frame of my research, these concerns were highly salient, and I did not record or observe any indications that the application process had resolved them from the perspective of these stakeholders. Now, I want to make a brief comment about the process. The process for evaluating these applications is complicated at the best of times, and the residents the community members have had to navigate it during a time of unprecedented challenges. Not only has COVID-19 made public participation more challenging, but at the same time, during 2019 and 2020, changes to legislation were affecting the process, and that was ongoing during the process, of course. For example, Bill 132 included changes affecting aggregate mining and its evaluation, and these appear to have concerned many people, with these and other environmental regulatory changes generating 384 comments, which were documented in the Environmental Registry of Ontario. So combine that with COVID-19 and its social impacts, and it's really important to consider that engaging in a participatory process like this under those dynamic circumstances must have been quite a challenge for the stakeholders involved. Now, I've already provided my analysis to the councillors here today. I sent that by email. I hope that organizing my observations in the way that I did in that article might have been useful to you in informing your decision or in thinking about these issues moving forward. If you have any questions related to it, or if you for some reason did not receive my copy and still would like one, I'm of course happy to supply it at any time, and also to respond to questions now or by email. But as we continue today, I think considering the amount of engagement we already have, that you've already seen on this issue. I'd just like to highlight that meaningful public participation in consequential decisions like this, it's a core value and a crucial aspect of sound decision-making within the democratic process. And it has been impacted between 2019 and today. So I guess with that in mind, I'd just like to, first of all, compliment the councillors for extending these meetings over the 2 days, and for all of the stakeholders and people attending the meetings for so meaningfully engaging in this highly democratic and absolutely crucial process to inform this important decision. And if anyone would like a copy of this analysis, I will go to the chat when I'm out of this webinar, and you can let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Sol. Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you again. Our next presenter is Alan Dorst.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
I know, I can't hear you. Oh, man. Okay, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry about the interruption. My name is Alan Trost. I live at 2634 Bleems Road, New Hamburg. I opposed the gravel pit. I have two farming operations on Whitmer Road. The first at 2025 Whitmer Road. The farm is a layer hen operation. It is my understanding that this farm is not included in the agricultural impact study. On this farm, I have close to 30,000 layer hens in the barn. They produce fresh eggs daily. They drink a total of 6,000 liters of water and no less. The flock comes in the barn at 19 weeks and they stay in the barn for 358 days. The barn is empty for a week, cleaned, and then repopulated the following week. The farm at 2089 Whitmer Road is a pullet operation. Here the chicks come in the barn the day they are hatched. They stay in the barn for 19 weeks. Then they move on to a layer facility. The barn at capacity holds 92,000 birds. I have 80,000 birds in the barn at a time, and I grow 2 flocks a year. As the pullets get older, they drink upwards to a total of 10,000 liters of water a day. I have a separate well for each farm. My chickens rely on fresh water. If they run out of fresh water, I will be out of business. My wells are approximately 70 feet deep and 60 feet deep. In the world of farming, there's a lot of things that are out of my control that I can work around with the help of Egg Farmers of Canada. Some recent examples include the pandemic and most recently the bird flu. The bird flu, which originated in New Hamburg. I shouldn't have to worry about a gravel pit putting me out of business by affecting the water table. They say that water veins run south. If that is true, I could run out of water. What does council propose if I do run out of water due to a gravel pit? And then I just have a couple other points here too. Regarding the dust and fumes, the prevailing winds go right towards my buildings and my air intakes draw fresh air daily. And regarding the road traveling on Whitmer Road with large farm equipment could be a problem to other farms on Whitmer Road, including my own. The loud noise, beeping, and constant braking, it should be noted that chickens' hearing is so sensitive and acute that they can determine where the sound is coming from and pinpoint the noise within a few feet without seeing the source. In 1991, the council agreed that no trucks would travel on Whitmer Road. The agreement was broken. Then they allowed the former Dino pit and township to exit onto Huron Road. while the township has an exit onto Queen Street that is not being used. The council also ignored the agreement when they allowed Stephen Evans Pit to exit onto Whitmer Road. Now, they want to come up Whitmer Road another 1.5 kilometers. Next, Lafarge will want to exit on Whitmer Road. Loud noise is a known fact to lower egg production. In addition, studies have shown that loud noises, such as found near airports, railroad tracks, and loud hydraulic and pneumatic equipment and machinery close to the chickens lead to lower egg production, stunted growth, and higher blood pressure. And that's about what I would like to say, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Alan. There are no questions, so thank you again, Alan. Our next speaker is Clark Rick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, that delegation is not waiting in the attendees.
Very good. Then we shall move on to Larrie Elash. Welcome, Larrie. You have your 7 minutes. Your volume is pretty low. We can't hardly hear you. Still can't hear you. We can't hear you at all. We can give you some time to try and correct it if you can. Still no sound. Not yet. What's that? Have her leave and come back? We might suggest that maybe if you leave and then come back, and maybe we can get it straightened out that way. I'm getting
Through you, Mayor Armstrong.
oh, there you are.
No, it's Dawn. Or Miss Middleholt. The delegation may also wish to make use of the telephone connection as well. Delegations are more than welcome to call in. Information was also provided in the emails that provided their Zoom link. So she can delegate to council through the phone if she wishes.
Very good. Thank you. Hopefully she got the message. Yeah. So because of time, we'll have Kathy Larrie come in until we can reconnect with Larrie Elash. Hello, Kathy. Welcome. You have your 7 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor Armstrong and Wilmot councillors. My name is Kathy Larrie. I've lived in Wilmot for over 50 years. Most of those have been within 3 kilometers of the proposed pit. My major objection to this application is the risk of damaging the aquifer and the groundwater. As a child, I remember my parents being told our newly dug Wilmot Center well would have enough water to supply a herd of cattle for years to come. Then the region started taking water from the area. The well was never used for livestock, but it, as well as many other neighboring ones, dried up. We recall then having to ration and pay our water trucked in. My parents needed to drill a new, deeper well. In rural areas, we are dependent on our wells. When all of us open our tap, we expect clean water to flow. In the 1960s, I remember a brand new overflowing or artesian well on the farm across from the old Wilmot Center School. Many of the neighbors visited with excitement to see this fresh, clean water spurting out the top. It doesn't do that anymore. Another neighborhood farm had a powerful enough spring that, using gravity, they ran water to their upstairs bathroom without a pump. Maps of the area show numerous streams running through. Recently, brook trout, not seen earlier, have been found in one of those streams. These examples reflect some of the rich water resource history in this immediate area. The proposed pit falls within an area with the posted drinking water protection zone signs. The region obviously realizes it's an area worth protecting. I recently read that the region used water from this aquifer to reduce the overall rising salt level in their supply. We need gravel in the ground to continue to filter this valuable resource. Elmira's water supply will probably never recover despite continued efforts to repair their damaged aquifer. We often hike at the hydrocut near Petersburg. We used to hear many birds and see lots of wildlife there. Since that pit expansion, we don't hear or see much other than heavy equipment, loud banging, vibrations, and backup alarms. The Reform Gravel Mining Coalition moratorium is very timely. Here we live in a green belt. This past week, I saw it being referred to as a blue belt due to its water resources. Previous suggestions of approval or requests for the applicant to meet guidelines for this pit are not grounds to go ahead with it. Many will argue that we need the gravel for the road and building construction. Some say the pit will save the cost of trucking needed gravel here for upcoming growth. I think if the aquifer is damaged, the cost of trucking or building pipelines to bring fresh water to the region for many years to come will be much higher than any cost savings. The 1972 Conversations with North American Indians contains an often quoted saying, Canada, the most affluent of countries, operates on a depletion economy which leaves destruction in its wake. Your people are driven by a terrible sense of deficiency. When the last tree is cut, the last fish is caught, the last river is polluted, when to breathe the air is sickening, you will realize too late that wealth is not in bank accounts and that you can't eat money. For all of these reasons, mostly the risk of damaging the aquifer and our groundwater, I encourage you to vote against this pit approval. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Kathy. There are no questions, so thanks again. Okay, so our next speaker is Matthewreddy.
This one?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Matt. We just can't see you.
Oh, there we are.
There you are.
Hi, thank you.
Go ahead, Matt. Welcome.
Good evening, councils and fellow citizens. My name is Matthewreddy. I live in the log house at 2094 Bleams Road, right on the main drag in our quiet and beloved Shingletown. As we sit here tonight and listen to these 50 some odd delegations, I feel many emotions. I feel empowered to be part of something that is so controversial that has brought the biggest presence to a council meeting in the history of Wilmot Township. I feel happy in knowing that by banding together, donating hard-earned money and spending countless hours of our spare time reading, researching, and talking, we could be saving our home lives as we know them. I feel sad knowing that this decision could affect tens, even hundreds of thousands of unsuspecting residents who live in the region to be impacted when their drinking water becomes contaminated. I am an optimist. I can bet most certainly that Murphy's Law will apply here, hence why I said when our drinking water becomes contaminated. I also feel angry that this decision could change life for all of us as we know it. By all of us, I'm not referring to simply just us who are in direct proximity. I mean everyone who is here and part of this meeting today. Council members, your family, children, parents, friends, pets could all be affected. Think about that, not just with your brains, but feel it in your heart. I encourage you to have all the feelings that we have experienced since this application process began. Yes, the application has been submitted, all studies complete and deemed satisfying by people that have many more fancy letters after their job title than I do. But even I didn't have to study the environment at university or get a fancy degree to know that the idea, thought, and proposal of this pit is totally ludicrous and naive. Who in their right mind would allow a gravel pit to operate 6 days a week, less than a couple hundred meters away from the back doors of homes and a community? How could you allow this gravel pit to dig down to within 5.5 feet of an aquifer? These are hard questions to answer when things go wrong. These are the hard questions that you as council members will have to answer when things in fact do go wrong. Insert the movies Aaron Brockovich and Dark Waters here. If you haven't seen either of them, I encourage you to do so. By approving this gravel pit, the dirt will be on your hands, in your minds, and worst of all, on your conscience. By approving this gravel pit, you as council members are stating that monetary gain is more important than the well-being of an entire community and the hundreds of people who live within it. Ignorance is not bliss. Let's use some common sense here and put this to rest before things even have the chance to start going wrong. The place is not here and the time is not now. Thank you for their time.
Thank you, Matt. There are no questions. Our next speaker is Dorothy Wilson.
Good evening. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Dorothy. Go
Okay.
ahead. You had your 7 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Mayor Armstrong, Wilmot councillors and staff, members of the public. My name is Dorothy Wilson, and I'm here this evening on behalf of the Nith Valley Eco Boosters. Our group supports the Citizens for Safe Groundwater's opposition to the zoning change application for the proposed development of the Holman gravel pit. We feel that the construction of the gravel pit is not in the best interest for Wilmot's long-term healthy environment. Slide 2, please. My focus this evening is our concerns about the environmental assessments that have been submitted to the township in the application for zoning change. Senior ecologist Dean Fitzgerald, who has expertise with environmental assessments and environmental impact statements, reviewed the applicant's assessments. He pointed out numerous deficits in the reports in relation to wildlife, wetlands, and water. Slide 3, please. According to Mr. Fitzgerald, the assessment of significant wildlife habitat showed a failure to do a proper inventory. As a result, the impact on significant wildlife habitat from activity at the gravel pit cannot be adequately evaluated. All habitats that could possibly be influenced by the proposed activity, including woodlands, wetlands, migration corridors, and the surface water features, need to be considered. Mr. Fitzgerald felt that the study of wildlife migration in the area of the proposed gravel pit was incomplete, because it did not include samples from a variety of seasons and times of day. The study focused only on one pattern of migration, but due to the presence of varied natural heritage features, other patterns of wildlife migration were feasible. Slide 4, please. In conjunction with wildlife habitat, it is important to consider the possible repercussions to wildlife themselves, especially species at risk. In Mr. Fitzgerald's assessment of species at risk surveys, he found them to be incomplete, as illustrated by the assessment of risks to bats. These animals can use varied habitats such as large trees, tree stumps, and rock piles, and not all possible habitats were assessed. The proposed schedule for tree clearing in the vicinity of the gravel pit, starting on October the 31st, when bats have already entered their overwintering location in the trees, could result in displacement of bats or loss of life due to starvation or freezing to death. Turtles and monarchs are other species at risk that Mr. Fitzgerald felt were compromised because of incomplete information in the environmental impact statement. Why is this important? According to the Canadian Wildlife Federation, wildlife plays a vital role in the ecological and biological processes that are essential to life. Some of the biological processes in which wildlife play a key role are pollination, seed dispersal, soil germination, seed generation, habitat maintenance, and pest control. When it comes to pest control, it's well known that bats in particular are very important because they eat lots of insects. Slide 5, please. In his elaboration of why the assessment of the wetlands was inadequate, Mr. Fitzgerald noted that it's important to understand that wetlands have a water connection or link to each other. In the case of the area in question, the wetlands are likely part of a larger wetlands patch. Field studies of wetlands during spring, when the water level is high due to snow melt, would allow a full representation of the wetlands boundary. However, the wetlands analysis done for the applicant was based primarily on late summer data, which has likely affected the information about the actual dimensions of the wetland, wildlife habitat, and flood patterns. Developing the Hallman gravel pit would risk wetlands losing water. Both the Region of Waterloo and provincial rules dictate that a new project cannot result in a net loss of water. In order to achieve a no net loss of water, solid baseline data is required, which would include a water balance analysis that considered all possible sources of water taking within 1 kilometer of the wetlands, plus a full calendar year of precipitation. Water balance studies should have been done on nearby surface water areas as well to determine the cumulative effects of the proposed gravel pit. Slide 6, please. One of the most critical issues regarding the proposed gravel pit is the risk of contamination of groundwater. In Mr. Fitzgerald's response to the groundwater studies submitted by the applicant, he expressed concern that the 1.5 meter distance between the high mark of the groundwater levels and the bottom of the pit is insufficient to prevent migration of chemicals from the pit to groundwater. The plan to have an asphalt recycling operation at the site is a cause for concern about contamination as well. Piles of asphalt awaiting recycling could be a source of contaminated runoff if not contained and treated. The environmental impact statement does not include a proper assessment of the asphalt activities. Protecting groundwater is essential for the Region of Waterloo, since that is the source of most of our drinking water. In fact, the Region of Waterloo has a source protection plan that is intended to protect municipal wells from activities that could contaminate our drinking water. In addition, the Township of Wilmot is committed to providing safe drinking water to its residents. It follows then that our municipality should not allow any activities that could jeopardize our water sources, such as permitting a gravel pit that is very close to residential as well as municipal wells. Slide 7, please. This presentation and others provide expert opinions on the deficits in the environmental assessments provided by the applicant and the reasons why the proposed gravel pit, Hallman gravel pit, poses significant risks to our community. There is potential for wildlife habitat to be disrupted, affecting a number of species at risk. There's a potential for wetlands to lose water and become contaminated. Finally, there is the risk of our drinking water becoming contaminated as well. The Nith Valley Eco Boosters urges you to avoid subjecting Wilmot to these risks. Please vote against the application for a zoning change that would allow the development of the Hallman gravel pit. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Okay, thank you. I see no questions, so thank you very much. So we have a phone caller. Maybe that is Larrie back.
Good evening, Mayor Armstrong. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's Larrie, is it?
Yes, it is. Apologies for the earlier
It's
technical
good to hear your
issues.
voice. Okay, you have your 7 minutes then.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor Armstrong, members of council, and all in attendance. My name is Larrie Elash, and my husband, Mo Elash, is here as well. We have lived at 2229 Bleams Road in Shingletown for nearly 9 years now, and we feel truly thankful to call this peaceful rural community home. We are compelled to be here today to add our voices to those representing and supporting citizens for safe groundwater, restating the widespread negative results that will likely occur to the groundwater, the farmland, the wildlife, the air quality, and the health and well-being of all the community members should this gravel pit be allowed. We are both firmly opposed to the Hallman gravel pit proposal. With respect, we expect council to deny the requested zone change. We have a 12-acre property north of the proposed Hallman gravel pit, kitty corner to the inside-most point of that property. The proposal indicates, if I understand it correctly, that aggregate mining would be in full force in that corner of land, which is about 150 meters from our back door and from our private well. We are very concerned about the impact it may have on the water quality of our private well, which we rely on for all of our water needs. To our knowledge, our private well was not inspected or investigated, and as such, I don't believe it is included in Mr. Esbaugh's hydrogeological report. If this is the case, there is no baseline data, and the impact of the proposed gravel pit on our private well would not be able to be determined. There continue to be outstanding issues and recommendations with this proposal in general, and in specific to protect private well owners that have not yet been addressed, nor safeguards committed to. These were outlined by many people before us, even last week, particularly Samantha Lernout and the Planscape presentations. Right now, the land in question is quiet, beautiful, productive farmland. This proposal would result in a huge berm instead of beautiful farmland. It would replace the tranquil quiet with loud, rumbling vibrations of machinery and constant clanging and beeping of heavy vehicles, which would carry throughout our community. Large vehicle traffic would be greatly increased, and the potential contamination of water and air has been shown repeatedly. We rent 8 acres of our land to a neighboring farmer. Water from the neighboring fields washes into and often floods our field in the spring, some years accumulating into what we fondly call Horseshoe Lake, as it surrounds 3 sides of our home before eventually soaking into the ground. We don't even want to imagine what the spring runoff might bring with it if this proposal is granted, or how it might affect our farmland. The proposed gravel pit would also result in unnecessary health concerns for residents. The fine particulate matter from the excavations and extra diesel in the air from trucks and excavators are likely to cause breathing and other significant health issues, which will only become more evident over time. We implore you to please represent and protect us, your citizens, to consider our well-being and quality of life, and to do what's best for Wilmot Township and beyond by protecting the invaluable and irreplaceable resources of prime farmland and groundwater. The groundwater which supplies not only Wilmot Township, but also Waterloo Region. The research presented by Citizens for Safe Groundwater has shown the overwhelmingly negative consequences of allowing a gravel pit. This gravel pit is unnecessary and detrimental in so many ways to so many citizens and will have widespread negative long-term impacts. This gravel pit should not be permitted. Please protect our beautiful community by putting the irreplaceable prime farmland and groundwater first and vote no to this municipal zone change application. Please put your people's health and well-being first and vote no to the Hallman pit. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Larrie. Okay, so our next delegation is Ed Dupee. As an accommodation, Kevin Wood will read Ed's delegation. His own delegation will follow. So, welcome, Calvin and Ed.
Am I there?
You're here. Welcome. Go ahead with
evening.
Ed's 7 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor. And Tracy, just to things to speed up, Mayor, what I've done is I've taken Ed and my speech and put it together. It reads in about 8 minutes. So instead of being stopped at 7, could I take the 8 minutes to read both of them to get time moving on?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
And I think you should turn your volume up just a smidge if you can.
Oh, on the mic?
Yes, please.
Is that better?
That is better. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I don't want to go too high. There you go. Sorry about that, guys. Expand. Okay, good evening, Council, Mayor, and everyone else that's involved. It is with a very heavy heart that I address you all on this clear and transparent process to change the zoning on Whitmer Road. The deception starts with one of the largest multi-million-dollar miners of aggregate in the area applying for a zone change without using his well-respected name in that area. Instead, they decide to apply under Jackson Harvest Farms. Our MP, Mike Harris, has all but ignored us after sending his assistant to an early community meeting. Township was directed not to engage with citizens of Safe Water in fears of appearing biased. Our mayor spoke to 4 residents at a regional meeting referring to the Hallman pit as a done deal. Rick Esbaugh himself has sat at my kitchen table in April of 2019 as per disclosure rules and told me personally that this was a done deal. It was just a formality until it was approved. The region denies our expert reports and omits informing citizens of Safe Water on a timely basis critical approvals and updates during this clear and transparent process. 300 objectors were thrown out because of a form of issue on postal code. We all have the same postal code. Refusal of the cumulative noise and dust study, even though if Rick builds the new road as per the application, not 1, not 2, but 3 gravel pits will now have exclusive access to this new exclusive road. Rick Esbaugh entered into a speculative real estate deal that was always dependent on one thing and one thing only, a zone change. In order to apply for that zone change, Rick had to apply to the ministry to be issued a permit package that must be completed and approved by the region before it goes to council to vote on. Rick has done all of his homework as per Mr. Cisco, and that we, the 50 families, are asking for standards that no one can meet. Respectfully, Mr. Cisco, we, the 80 objectors left, do not accept your resolutions and do not feel that our objections have been satisfied. Thank you, Council, for setting up the Whitmer Farm last week for those who could not express their feelings remotely. A very special thanks to all the delegators that braved the cold for 4 hours to let Council know how you feel. A very special thanks to former City of Kitchener Councillor Yvonne Fernandez for expressing upon Council. As elected representatives, you are the only ones who hold the cards and the buck stops with you. Yes, you can say no to a proposal that will scar and damage the landscape for decades to come. A very special thanks to Stefan Cesarback of Planscape, who says the applicant failed to consider provincial, regional, and township planning policies. He also raised questions if it meets 2020 PPSE requirements. A very special thanks to Mr. Ed Dupee for researching the following facts. The tax rate on farmland is 0.0065. The tax rate on a gravel pit is 0.00247. This is a 62% tax reduction. The rezoning of the pond area and the woodland area to open space, as per the proposal, as a zero tax assessment, overall a 70% tax lost. It has also been the responsibility of the township to notify MPAC and all landowners within 1 kilometer of the reduction in their property tax. MPAC rules this reduction is in place for the full restoration of the subject property. MPAC agrees the application will negatively affect all of our properties. That's not the problem. The problem is the measly 4% that we get reduced when we've had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars out of our own pockets to defend ourselves. This is a very, very sticky point. In the application, Rick is to spend approximately $3 million to build a 1 kilometer section of superhighway that will last 20 years as per Mr. Sisco. We, the taxpayers, will be responsible for all other roads and maintenance in the township. As per the mayor of a township that has the 3rd largest number of gravel pits in the province, what we make off of gravel pits doesn't even cover the cost to fix the potholes. Estimated cost to taxpayers to maintain and replace said road, 5 kilometers either side of the 1 kilometer application area at the end of the lifespan of the pit of 20 years is estimated at $50 million. Is that in our budget? Who's paying for that? We, the taxpayers. I understand the current minimum setback is 30 meters set by the ministry, I believe. Thank you, Rick, for giving us 120 meters in your application. Council, are you aware that the standard for planning now and has been for a while is 300 meters or 900 feet, mostly due to reduce dust and carcinogenics byproducts and give them more time to dilute the air before harming the neighbors. A very special thanks goes out to Mr. Scott Manser of Ortec for showing us all the science behind the 0.5 kilometer increased danger zone that affects all of us that border this project. In conclusion, please understand clearly that we, the 50 families that border the application, do not accept the applicant's responses. We feel none of our objections were properly addressed, specifically rehabilitation. Can anyone show us a successful rehabilitation in Ontario? The answer is no. Why, I ask? Because there's no enforcement in place for a self-regulated industry. There is no one that is taking responsibility. You phone the ministry, they put you to the region, they put you to the council and township, and you guys put us back to the ministry. It is a vicious circle of non-answers. The ministry's application is just an application. They have met the minimum requirements for the region to sign off. You as council have no legal obligation to approve this application because Rick has followed a process. You do, however, have an obligation to protect the taxpaying citizens of Wilmot. You do have an obligation to protect the Township of Wilmot financially going forward. You do have an obligation to protect the health and well-being of the 50 families that border this application. Thank you for supporting the moratorium on gravel pits. Rick and his family are not going to miss a meal because this application was voted down tonight. 50 families, however, have already missed way more than a meal. They have had countless zone meetings and hours researching to educate all of us on an unfair process as far as we are all concerned. They rallied together and raised just under $100,000 for expert opinions that differ from the non-scientific proof brought by the applicant. 7 have already left. The rest of us are living in fear of the consequences. A yes vote tonight takes away our biggest piece of armor, an established bylaw put in place by previous council to protect the families on these roads against this type of traffic. I believe beyond a reasonable doubt that we, the 50 families objecting to this zone change, have given council more than enough science, economic, and health and well-being concerns to vote no to this application and let us all have our first night of sleep in 2 years. Thank you for your undivided attention.
Thank you, Calvin. And there are no questions. So our next speaker is Susan Dupee. Welcome, Susan. You have your 7 minutes.
Thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dr. Susan Dupee, and I am a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada postdoctoral fellow at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. And I grew up in Shingletown at 2122 Bleems Road. And now, with weekly visits to Nanny and Granddad's house, my own 3 kids, as well as my brother's 2 kids, get the chance to grow up in Shingletown to some extent. Mr. Gerber, it's good to see you. You may not remember me, but I was one of your students at Waterloo Oxford District Secondary School in the 1990s. I lived in Shingletown during that time, as did many other students that went to that high school. I'm here today to oppose the gravel pit. But more than that, I am here to ask council, that's you, to stand up with the community to oppose the gravel pit and zone change. The community, including myself, as a resident of the region, has become aware of discrepancies and conflicting reports and conflicting positions around the risks that the gravel pit poses to the safety of groundwater, especially. So for instance, my dad, Ed Dupee, has done a ton of research on the matter. He showed me a letter that was dated November 18th, 2020, and it was from the region of Waterloo, and it actually identifies the risk that comes with the removal of the natural biofilter in the development of the gravel pit. This is a risk that experts have presented evidence to you, councillors, over the past week, last meeting. So the letter from the Waterloo region notes that, quote, shorter travel times to the water table will affect the fate of nitrates in the municipal aquifer, which was found to be devoid of nitrates beneath the subject property, end quote. So in making this statement in this letter, the region of Waterloo seemingly is acknowledging that there is a potential risk that the water source that is not currently contaminated could become contaminated with the introduction of the gravel pit. This is the same risk identified and presented to the council by several groundwater experts. So this raises all kinds of questions in just one area. So first, has the region signed off on a project that they themselves acknowledge as having risk? And if so, in deferring to the region, then does this mean the township inherently acknowledged the risk as well? And so if both the region and the township are acknowledging the risk, why is it so easily being dismissed? I don't think that we can deny that there is evidence that's been presented to us here that shows there is risk. What is the benefit of dismissing the risk? That's my question. To what degree do the benefits of a private gravel pit outweigh the risks that a private gravel pit pose to an entire community's source of drinking water? Who is benefiting from the gravel pit anyway, if not the community, which has been very clearly stated to council? The dismissal of a seemingly obvious and apparently acknowledged risk the gravel pit poses to the environmental and social well-being of the community as a whole, this has eroded the trust that the people have in their leadership, which is you, the council. Risking the community's groundwater for the benefit of a private business will no doubt result in an even greater loss of trust in both provincial and municipal leadership. Now, although it's not the case for all Canadians, but for the majority of Canadians, access to clean, safe water is a privilege for which we should be grateful. More important than having access to clean, safe water, however, are the protections that surround and safeguard our access to clean, safe water. Under Section 39, Paragraph 2 of the Clean Water Act, it states that where there are conflicts with official plans, bylaws, or any other act, the Clean Water Act shall prevail. The aim of the Clean Water Act is to prevent, reduce, and eliminate pollution in national water sources, which includes groundwater. So does the federal protection not apply here to the case of the gravel pit, where the risks of development threaten the goals of the National Clean Water Act? The purpose of these protections at the federal level is to preserve and protect the quality of groundwater for the greatest number of water users. The greatest number of water users, councillors, in this instance is the community at stake. This community that has been pleading to you. They've been pleading to you to say no. More than a national safeguard like the Clean Water Act for protecting groundwater, it seems as though the people's safeguard to clean, safe water actually comes down to the political will of their local leadership to stand up with the community for the community. Council, will you stand up with the community and help the people safeguard their access to clean water? You can support the community you represent by opposing the gravel pit and denying its application for a zone change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. And there are no questions. Our next speaker is Howard Medill.
Mr. Mayor?
Welcome, Howard. We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Mayor?
I can hear you, but like I said, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
I know, but I spoke last week at the barn.
Okay.
So do you want me to speak again or not?
Nope, that's fine.
Okay.
So the next would be Joe Gowie. Welcome, Joe.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You have your 7 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Armstrong, members of council, and citizens tuning in online. My name is Joe Gowing. I've been following the zone change application for 2 years now. I won't take a lot of everyone's time this evening, but I wanted to share a few comments with you. Last Monday was an amazing night. I'm sure you all can agree on that. A similar night is unfolding. We heard from planners, we heard from qualified experts, we heard from a group of residents sitting in a cold barn. We heard from citizens across Wilmot, Waterloo region, and beyond. The message was and continues to be unified against this zone change application. We heard from the applicant's planner, Mr. Cisco. I was really surprised at his strategy of delegation. I was expecting him to talk about benefits of the application to the community. I was expecting him to reinforce the applicant's commitment to protecting the health and well-being of the community. I was expecting him to focus on the experts that have challenged his application, which continued to remain unaddressed. Instead, the planner for the applicant spent the majority of his time speaking negatively about the community and negatively about the process that is actually coined applicant driven. Instead of addressing council directly on the merits of the application, Mr. Cisco delivered a message to the community that instead of addressing their concerns, they could take him and Mr. Esba's application to the Ontario Land Tribunal. This reinforces what I believed at the first public meeting, and that I continue to believe today, that the community has a sound argument for why this zone change must be voted down. The community has checked all the boxes, not the applicant. The community deserves your confidence, your vote, and your unwavering commitment should this go to a tribunal. For the last 2 years, we have been at an extremely high level of public sensitivity. We implemented masking to mitigate particles from being inhaled. We stayed safe by staying home. We leaned on our neighbors. We relied on our backyards as havens. So it really shocked me to the core when Ortec delegated about the negative air quality impacts to the neighboring Shingletown and Whitmer Road. That a noise study using live on-site data by the community has produced a different classification from the applicant, actually suggesting that Shingletown is quieter than the applicant wants you to believe. That risks to private well users have remained unaddressed. That adequate road safety for families and recreational users on a township-owned road has fallen short of addressing the expert peer review. These experts cannot be ignored by council tonight. You, as Wilmot's elected representatives, as its leaders, have repeatedly implored the public to care for our neighbors, to protect ourselves and our families. It's now time for you it's now time for the same sense of urgency by you, the governing body of Wilmot, to take care of its citizens. I can honestly stand here and tell you this community-led movement has been balanced at being passionate and being professional. They have come with credible expert peer reviews. Their support spans across Waterloo region and indeed now the entire province. They have delivered on everything that has been asked or expected of them in this process. I urge you to acknowledge their work, their experts, and their message. I ask you to vote no to Jackson Harvest Farms zone change application. Thank you for your time, your open mind, and your commitment to this community.
Thank you, Joe. There are no questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Our next speaker is Catherine Young.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Ms. Young advised us earlier today that she's not able to make it this evening, and she's provided her written comment, which will be included in the record.
Thank you. So next we go to Ralph Schrader.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Ralph. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
That's okay. Good evening, Mayor Armstrong, council, neighbors, and friends. My name is Ralph Schroeder, and I live in Shingletown at 2106 Bleems Road. My family has lived on this hobby farm since 1988. 5 generations of my family have enjoyed living on and visiting our property, and I hope more will. I support my wife, Helen's comments and views made last Monday. I have questions. Why does the GRCA request access to my property to check usage and storage on my farmland? Why does the township want to access my property to inspect my septic tank? Why is there a sign outside my property stating this is a water protection zone? I would assume because they are interested in protecting water. Our house faces the proposed pit, and I don't want to look at it. I don't want to hear it, and we can't breathe it in. We would be devastated if we had to leave our home because of health issues made worse by the Holman pit. I am opposed to the creation of the Holman pit. Please say no to the zone change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. And no questions. Our next speaker is Sue and Arnie Kennel.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Mr. and Mrs. Kennel advised that they were unable to make it this evening, and they have provided written comment, which will be included in the record.
Very good. Thank you. Our next speaker is Joyce Mack.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, it appears as though that delegation is no longer waiting in the attendee room.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is John Jordan. Welcome, John. You have 7 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to delegate this evening. Since my delegation is going to be under the 7 minutes, I think we'd all be remiss in not mentioning a big congratulations to our local resident and our good friend, John Bailey, for his Grammy Award winning recording engineering last week. And big congratulations out to him. And tomorrow is garbage day and recycling, John, not last week. Anyway. Good evening, everyone. Mayor Armstrong, Wilmot Council staff, and all the residents of Wilmot and beyond who are engaged in tonight's meeting. It's been quite a journey over the past number of years to get where we are tonight in regard to the Holman pit. My delegation will not get into any of the nitty-gritty study or report details, but more to the soft issues at hand regarding the consequences of the rezoning of the Whitmer Road property and the effect on future generations. In looking at this issue from a 40,000 foot level, the main issue that rises to the top is the threat to our water supply. Mr. Esbaugh and his team, with the knowledge of the various fields at hand, have provided their own reports saying that there will be no threat to the drinking water. At the Citizens for Safe Groundwater meeting held at the Rec Center before the pandemic came down on us, I posed the question to this team. Can you with 100% certainty ensure the water will not be affected? A lot of words were replied back from the person answering, but in the end, he conceded that they cannot with 100% certainty guarantee that the water will not be affected. Let's let that sink in. If there is any threat to our water supply, why would we take the risk? The next point, after the threat to the drinking water, is that we'll be losing many acres of fertile farmland, which will no longer grow food. The two most important things to our survival, food and water, are both either being threatened or taken away completely. Yes, I suppose that after decades of aggregate being mined, dust pollution, noise pollution, and massively increased heavy truck traffic that will affect our environment and drastically change our target numbers for Wilmot's reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, the topsoil may be put back, but the geology of the land will never be the same and or possibly never farmed again, at least not for many, many generations. Mr. Mayor, Last week on the Mike Farwell show, you stated that you cannot vote no to a gravel pit for the reason of having enough gravel already. You're right, you can't. But let's look at the myriad of all of the other reasons why you should vote no to a zoning change. The dust, the noise, the pollution, the increased truck traffic, the loss of farmland, the quality of life, and most of all, the threat to our drinking water. If the drinking water is affected, what liability does that put on the township? Do I even need to mention the word Walkerton? My next point is a very soft issue and possibly leaning on a technical issue, and this comes squarely on the laps of every council member. You, the councillors of the Township of Wilmot, have full discretion to make a decision that is either going to affect the residents of this township positively or very negatively. You have full control of voting for or against the issue. No one can tell you that you can only vote in one direction. No one. Recommendations can be made from various personnel, but it is completely up to you to choose the right path, doing the right thing. I want to provide you with a very important part of the Municipal Act. What I'm about to read can be found in the Municipal Act in Chapter 15 entitled Municipal Liability, Section 448, Paragraph 1, and it reads as follows. No proceeding for damages or otherwise shall be commenced against a member of council or an officer, employee or agent of a municipality, or a person acting under the instructions of the officer, employee, or agent for any act done in good faith in the performance or intended performance of a duty or authority under this act or a bylaw passed under it, or for any alleged neglect or default in the performance in good faith of the duty or authority. Council, may I reiterate that you cannot be liable for a decision you make this evening or any other time as long as it is done in good faith. In past history, council and or staff have had issues brought to them where the talk or possibly even a threat of legal action could put their personal property in jeopardy. As long as you, the councillors of the Township of Wilmot, are acting in good faith, you are immune to any actions or proceedings against you while you are acting as a councillor. Please put this part of the Municipal Act in the forefront when making your decision. This decision is not just something that is decided upon and then life continues as normal and mostly unencumbered. This decision will affect many Wilmot residents and possibly beyond for many generations to follow, either positively or very, very negatively. This resulting effect rests squarely upon your shoulders and is entirely up to you in this important decision that you make. Please do the right thing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is Mr. and Mrs. Claude Fernandez.
Okay. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes, we just can't see you. That's all.
Okay, that's fine. We'll just speak. Sorry. Take a bit then.
Go ahead. You have 7 minutes.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I come in with my family in Shangletown on 1986. For so long now, every 30 years, my kids, my grandkids, even now grandkids enjoy that backyard. I get 200 feet against the Alman pit. And so far, we get a really good cat. I built a pond on my yard. And I am surprised for many, many years, I get the wild dog coming to so close to my house to net. So I enjoy all this. but I want, with the pollution that the Alman bring, I can't live with my kids on that place anymore. So I join all the people from Shankletown on ID. I say no to Alman Pit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Michelle Lemire.
Yeah.
Hello, Michelle.
Hello,
Welcome.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Okay.
You have 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, council members, and thank you for listening to me and what I have to say. My name is Michelle Lemire. I live at 1470 Mannheim Road. I would first off like to say I agree completely with everything said by the speakers before me. They have done so well discussing the facts, studies, research, etc. Now, I'm going to start off by saying I personally am not a fan of technology. I'm old-fashioned and enjoy letters, phone calls, being outside and not on a device. However, one positive that has come with the internet is being able to pass along information and gather data for other people to use, study, and learn from. So with this, we can and should learn. We can no longer plead ignorance and claim, oh, we didn't realize that would happen. Oops. We can prevent bad situations from happening instead of fixing them once they happen. We can't reverse decisions once they've been made. Based on research, we know the detrimental effects gravel pits have, such as dust, noise pollution, water contamination, road stress, mental health, as well as one of the biggest ones, a space of 150 acres that will no longer be able to use ever once a proposed Holman pit is done. And many others that I don't have time to list. Please go back to everyone before me and after me and what they have spoken about. Let's use this information gathered by experts in these fields to prevent this rather than spend years trying to correct all these effects that may never be able to be adequately resolved. Please put yourselves in our shoes. And how would you honestly feel if there was a gravel pit proposed down the street from you or in your yard? What would you do, honestly? Now, I'm going to speak on a bit of a personal level. I personally have used Whitmer Road for over 13 years for recreational use, running, walking, etc. And I've seen many other people over the years as well using Whitmer Road, as well as it being a bus route and used by farmers. I've seen wildlife as well, deers, raccoons, ducks, foxes. It's absolutely amazing. With the increase of development everywhere, there are very few roads left to use recreationally anymore. The closest roads to us currently are Queen, Bleams, and Huron. These roads are so busy with traffic, they are not safe whatsoever. And I know because I've tried to use them and was almost hit by cars a couple of times. This leaves Whitmer Road as the only local road that can safely be used. With a proposed pit, there will be no safe roads left. That is not fair to any of us living on Whitmer Road and in the area. We all choose to live in the countryside because of the beautiful, peaceful, quiet that comes with it. Now, to reiterate, Whitmer Road is a township road that serves people recreationally. Not only myself, but many others use this for a mental break, to rejuvenate themselves through the beautiful, quiet street. The thought of this being taken away from myself and all the others makes me feel not only sick to my stomach, but sad. Whitmer Road cannot safely accommodate the proposed traffic of the Holman pit. Operation Russell Brownlee of True North Safety has completed a full report, including a site visit. His concerns are left outstanding. I strongly oppose this zone change. There is no benefit for Wilmot and its tax-paying citizens. We do not need this pit. There is one down the road, as you all know, we've mentioned this many times, not operating at full capacity. Greed and greed alone is not a good enough reason to open another gravel pit. Please strongly consider all of these valid points brought before you tonight and do the right thing. So many people have put their time, money, and hearts raising legitimate concerns. So again, please do the right thing and do not let us down. In 2022, with everything we know, climate change, environment, stress, all of that, we know a gravel pit is not the right thing to do. Thank you very much.
Is Abby part of your, she didn't show? Okay. She's, okay. So the next delegation.
The mayor will rejoin us in just a moment. Technical difficulty.
I left for a moment, but I'm back. So Ms. Wang.
Good evening, Mayor Armstrong. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Oh,
see you
great.
and we can hear
So
you.
good evening, all the councilors and all the attendees in this meeting. So my name's E, and I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate studying hydrology from University of Waterloo. So I got the opportunity to review the hydrogeology assessment report from this applicant, and then I would like to express some concerns that I believe it's overlooked before. So next slide, please. Yeah, so you can see that in our development service staff report, it says that the document provides sufficient analysis to demonstrate that this operation won't have impact our groundwater. But it's in my opinion, it's not like the assessment is not sufficient, and then I will explain why in the next slide, please. So if you look at the table 12 in this slide, I would like to highlight two places. The first one is that there will be a net increase in water during aggregate extraction based on current analysis. I think you already heard that the evaluation is outdated, so this assessment is not like up to date, I would say, and then. Based on this assessment, we know there will be a net increase in water. And then although this amount of water is very small, but this amount of water will either goes to our groundwater systems or going like as a surface runoff going to the significant wetland area as the surface runoff. And then this amount of water has been overlooked because it will potentially increase the water table level. And then as we know that the climate change prediction that there will be more extreme precipitation events in South Ontario, that means that this increased amount of the water will increase the ground table levels. And then so our proponent saying that they will adjust the pit floor elevation if there is a future change of the increasing the water table level, but there's no any adjustment plan. And then trust me, because based on my professional knowledge, this increase of the ground table level will like a compound interest rate. So it's not just like increase gradually because if you extra those aggregates, the infiltration rate will change, and then that increase will be very abrupt, and then that's a like a high risk, and then that will affect even like also affect the not the like the drinking water sources in this entire region, and then also have the high risk of the water contamination issues. So this is the first one I would like to point out. And then the second is that if you look at this table, and then there will be a total change of the total infiltration rate. So the total infiltration rate will most coming from those created ponds during the extraction activities. So next slide, please. So if you look at this this map from the application material, the washing pond is located at the those wetland watershed, the catchment. So this area, the washing pond, like this location, has a high risk on contaminating the water. Not maybe will just not just the groundwater, but also like surface water, and ultimately those suppress of the water will go into this catchment, and then this catchment also connected to the municipal wells. So so overall there will be a risk, and then it haven't been identified yet, and then I think is so there is a risk, and then I would like to point this out for you to consider. So I think the current hydrogeological assessment is still not sufficient yet, and then we may need more analysis to confirm, or we need also require the applicants to provide more adjusted plan to mitigate the potential negative effect. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. Thank you for that presentation. I'm always intrigued when the next greatest minds are sharing with us. You talked about the surface water and that it wasn't addressed in the hydrological report. Can you emphasize what further we should be asking for with that?
Sure. So usually, like when you get the aggregate extracted, and then you have the material fill this back, and then they also have like two directions. So one is that the material will have a lower infiltration rate. So then the other water, like the extreme precipitation, they come and then they will not infiltrate into the ground, and then they may go into the wetlands like as a surface runoff, and then as you see, the washing pond is located in part of that wetland catchment. So that will be some potential contamination issues around there. So that's the first possible way. And then the second way is that the filled material has a higher infiltration rate, and then that will cause the higher water table level. And then how the applicants to like adjust their pit floor when they already extract, and then the water table get higher, and then that will also have a potential risk. I think both of them haven't been addressed yet, so I really hope that they can at least provide some plans to see if how they can mitigate those.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for attending. So our next speaker is Linda Lundstrom.
Hi.
Well, welcome, Linda. You seem to be relaxing on your side there.
Oh, should I turn my phone the other way?
There you go.
Sorry.
Now you're upright.
Okay.
You have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Linda Lundstrom. I'm a resident of Caledon. I live on a lake, a spring-fed Kettle Lake in Caledon, a kilometer from the Credit River. Why am I here at the Wilmot Council meeting when I'm way over in Caledon? Imagine that we are all living on a living, breathing, loving being called Mother Earth. Her fields and forests are her lungs, purifying the air we breathe. She provides for all living things with fertile land to grow food, with rivers, lakes, streams, and wetlands to provide water, to nourish and support all forms of life. Look on Google Earth. Zoom in on the area north of the Great Lakes, north to Lake Huron, south to Lake Ontario, from Wilmot eastward. Zoom in and you will see how Mother Earth's rivers are like arteries, streams are like her veins, and the creeks are like capillaries. And some of the creeks you have to really zoom in on to see that they're there, but they're there. All part of a vast interconnected network, like a bloodstream in a human. Some of the rivers and streams we can see above the surface. Some lie below the surface, probably more even lie below the surface. This whole area is like a giant aquifer, a giant living organism. Now imagine that Mother Earth is having large sections of her skin blasted and scraped and taken away. Imagine the open wounds that are left bare with little or no attempt to cover them. Imagine that there are hundreds of these. No trees, no farmers' fields, hundreds of these wounds hidden from view with berms made from her topsoil. All this by companies with machines and explosives to reach her strong bones and crush them into material to build highways and concrete structures. Again, Mother Earth has generously provided us with gravel and other building materials we needed. But what if these crushed bones and gravel are not needed? What if existing pits and quarries in Ontario were more than able to provide plenty of aggregate material for all of Ontario's needs for many years to come? What if another wound on the skin of Mother Earth was not even necessary? Oh, but we're going to cover them up. We're going to rehabilitate them. We're going to fix them. We're going to carry out wound care. Of the thousands of gravel pits and quarries in Ontario, can you show us some that have been rehabilitated back to a natural state? There are very few. In 2019, residents of the hamlet of Cataract, near where I live, learned that there was a plan by Votorantim Cementos, CBM St. Mary's, operating in Canada as CBM St. Mary's, a Brazilian conglomerate, to blast and dig a deep quarry below the water table to access rich deposits of dolomite, limestone, a valuable material used in construction. They had to defend this beautiful area of farmland and forest from being the target of yet another aggregate operation. More than 10,000 years old. Of great concern was the proximity of the proposed site to the sacred Credit River. More than 10,000 years old, the Credit River, like the Nith River, is an historically significant meeting place for First Nations, trade and travel. Formed when the glaciers of the Ice Age melted, the river is an integral part of the vast aquifer known as the headwaters, feeding lakes, wells, rivers, and streams while nourishing forests, farms, and environmentally sensitive areas in the heart of Ontario's Greenbelt. This operation, if approved, would release millions of liters of highly mineralized water into the sacred Credit River. Now you may be saying, well, that's your problem. What has that got to do with Wilmot? Well, because we're all connected. We're all connected. Look on Google Earth and see how we are all connected by her veins, her arteries, her capillaries. What is happening in your backyard is happening in my backyard. And what is happening in our backyards is happening in the backyards of those to the east of Caledon. Because the dust from the aggregate operations here are being carried by the prevailing wind over there. I think I have some dust on a dresser of mine that's got a return address of a gravel pit near Wilmot on it.
You're at your time, Linda.
Why am I here? Well, because Mayor Armstrong and the councillors, you can demonstrate true leadership. Caledon is watching you as we face the same rezoning application by an international aggregate company. Thank you for considering how we are interconnected.
Thank you, Linda. Our next speaker is Mark Reeser.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you and we can see you, Mark. Welcome, and you have your 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Mark Reeser. I live at 1918 Huron Road, and I am Vice President of the Waterloo Federation of Agriculture and also Vice President of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a momentous decision to make tonight. Will you be an accessory to the continuing loss of farmland in Ontario? Or will you recognize that this is a resource in peril and merits protection, not only for this generation, but for all those who come after us? Yes, our meeting tonight is about a proposed aggregate site on Whitmer Road, but it is actually about all of the aggregate resources in this township. From the perspective of farmers in Waterloo Region, this is about the loss of farmland and the need to seriously rethink about how productive farmland should be valued. Can you please go to the next slide? When one refers to the aggregate resource map in the regional official plan, we see that approximately 1/4 of Wilmot's land mass is either identified as a resource or contains aggregate as evidenced by the existence of extraction sites outside of the mapped area. If we continue to issue licenses as we have in the past, 1/4 of our productive farmland will disappear, approximately 3,000 acres. Consider the following. Only 5% of Ontario's land mass is suitable for agriculture, and only 2% is prime farmland. That prime farmland is right here in Wilmot. A recent study identified Waterloo Region as having the second highest income per acre of any county in Ontario. That is incredible. We are losing approximately 175 acres of farmland every day in Ontario, 365 days a year, to both urbanization and to aggregate extraction. Aggregate soils are a non-renewable natural resource. If we pave them over or remove them by mining, they are gone forever. On the other hand, if we look after our soils, they are a perpetual resource and have the capacity to produce food potentially forever. Provincial legislation states that aggregate extraction is an interim use. Every license requires that this must occur. Please remember that all of the components of staff reports are based on the assumption that the land will be rehabilitated. But does this in fact happen? There are 8 active pits south of Whitmer Road. None of these have undertaken significant rehabilitation, including the pit owned by our very own township, where the vast majority of the covering topsoil has actually been removed from the site. Can you please go to the next slide? If one looks at the map, beginning in the bottom left-hand corner, that's the Dino paving pit, the Dino trucking pit, no rehab. The township pit is immediately to the right of it, no rehab. Go to the top, you can see the Cocoa paving pit, no rehab. And then to the left, the Boysen pit, also no rehab. Next slide, please. Shows the pit south of New Dundee, one below the water table, and the Serrers pit beside it. Again, no rehab on either. No potential rehab on the site with the water because it's below the water table. Next slide, please. Pit at the corner of Sand Hills Road, excuse me, in the expressway. Again, no significant rehabilitation. Next slide, please. And the two pits on Snyder's Road on either side of the bush. Again, no rehabilitation on either one. History shows us that rehabilitation does not occur. Why would we trust a private company to undertake rehabilitation when we as citizens of Wilmot don't even do it ourselves in a pit that we own? The proponents' own report suggests that after attempted rehabilitation, only 79% of the original land can be farmed. We know that at best, yields on rehabilitated pits produce at best 70% of previous yields. Taken together, that means that even if a pit is rehabilitated to the standards in the proponent's license, it will have at best 50% of its original productive capacity. That is if it is rehabilitated. Farmers in Waterloo are not asking you to ignore staff reports or the proponent's own reports. Rather, we are asking you to take them in context. If history shows us that rehabilitation does not occur, is it prudent to approve a zone change? You have an opportunity tonight to change history and send a message to the citizens of Wilmot and the government of Ontario. Protecting some of the best land in Ontario, if not the world, is important not only for us, but for all those who come after us. The farmers of Waterloo Region ask that you do the following. Take a risk, initiate change, exhibit courage, plan for the long-term future rather than the short-term present. Send a signal that what we have done in the past is no longer good enough. If we don't value farmland as a strategic resource, it will slowly but surely disappear, and that would be tragic for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Fanning.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. Mr. Reeser, I'm wondering if you've had a chance to review the proposed final depth and after rehabilitation in the applicant's plan. And I'd be interested in your perspective on the farmability of the space when it is proposed to be rehabilitated at a depth close to the height of an average silo in Wilmot Township.
I would refer to the proponent's own studies, which say that only 79% of the original land base would be even farmable. I would question why one would farm at the bottom of a pit. It's like a hole in the ground. It's obviously more frost prone because of its elevation. You're also farming on something that's been traveled over by bulldozers for years and years and years. It's compacted. Then you spread topsoil on top. It's akin to putting topsoil on a road and calling it farmland. It's not real rehabilitation. And I think When you look at the applicant's plan, it is similar to plans in all of the other sites that I identified. They all have plans for rehabilitation. And I would say, where is that rehabilitation? It hasn't occurred. Will it ever occur? I don't know. I can't answer that, but I think it's important to look at history.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Hallman.
Thank you for the mayor. I'm just looking at my note here while you were talking. Can you summarize again the 2% of prime farmland statement that you made? I just want to make sure I'm comprehending that exactly.
Only 5% of Ontario's land mass is suitable for agriculture. And that's all classes of land. And only about 2% is what we would consider prime farmland. So 2% of Ontario's land mass. And if you look at agricultural land in this region, it is prime.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker is Joyce Hall.
Unmute, start video. Okay, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Joyce. You are
finally.
here and you have your 7 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thanks so much for hearing me. Good evening, councillors of Wilmot County. I'm here and a little bit like Linda Lundstrom. I'm not a near neighbor, but I'm in Grey County. I'm a member of the Grey Highlands Climate Action Group, which is a member of the Grey Bruce Climate Action Network. And we decided as a group that we wanted to depute on this issue because we are in gravel country too, and we have had reason to pay attention to gravel and learn about gravel. We've talked to our own MPP about gravel frequently. So we have done some study and work on it. First of all, during this era of climate change and extremely serious warnings from the IPCC, we all feel as climate activists that the focus of municipal councils needs to be on finding the highest and best sustainable use of land, both for sequestration, food production, and ecosystem conservation. It's time to depart from business as usual. This proposed pit, I understand from what I've read, will diminish road safety, put groundwater supplies at risk, threaten the surrounding wetland. These are extremely serious dangers in the present context. And according to the zoning application on the township's website, an air quality assessment has not been completed. Perhaps it's been done in the meantime, but that's my most up-to-date information. I want to also speak about the Aggregate Resources Act as it currently exists. Recent changes, and this is in the last 2 or 3 years, 2019 actually, recent changes to the Aggregate Resources Act, if you look at them closely, they would advise you against the continued profligate issuing of gravel licenses. Both the Canadian Environmental Law Association and Conservation Ontario made submissions at the time that Bill 132 Section 16 was passed at the end of 2019. And they were calling for a definition of key terms. If you look at that Aggregate Resources Act as it was amended in 2019, there are key terms such as routine site planned amendments and low risk activity and routine activities, which figure importantly in this section of the Act. For example, there is a provision allowing for self-filing of changes to the site plan for so-called routine activities, leaving operators to decide what's routine, not even having a definition in the Act of what is routine activity, leaving them to decide what's routine and what's perhaps high risk is obviously not in the public interest. The Canadian Environmental Law Association and Conservation Ontario also asked that applications to extract below the water table be extremely rare and with public input. So the Act as it currently exists, with its recent amendments, with its vague definitions and its allowance for self-filing by the aggregate owners for changes to the site plan, just right away sets up a very, very dangerous situation. You may be aware that a coalition is formed called the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition, and they are extremely concerned about the whole business of aggregate. For one thing, as Linda Lundstrom pointed out, Ontario has more than enough aggregate, 13 times apparently what we need. And weirdly, there's no need to even show need. There's no requirement when you ask for a license to even show need in order to apply for a license. You can be planning, and this is often the case, it can be a large hunk of land can be purchased against future use. In other words, as a speculative investment. And then in the meantime, until that license is exploited, it can be used for farmland, rented out as farmland. Not the best use of farmland, because those farmers do not have a long-term interest in the health of that land. So it's just very, very poor land use policy. And the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition is actually calling for a moratorium on all gravel licenses to reform the entire form that this enterprise has taken. As Mr. Reusser pointed out, or the man who just spoke, the requirement to rehabilitate has been ignored, and you can see it everywhere. You can see these gouges in the land. And I looked that up. The reason is because as long as an aggregate company says we're still using it, they can just leave it. So they can take one truckload out every 4 years, and they can say, oh, well, we'll rehabilitate it when we're finished with it. I mean, what? It's a loophole, the size of the Grand Canyon. It is an industry in drastic need of reform. And that's why the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition is calling for that. So let's see, what else did I want to say about this particular application? I read Roger Farnan, his article either in a newspaper or perhaps he spoke at one of the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition's events. He's from Citizens for Safe Groundwater. Perhaps you've heard from him. He's pointed out in relation to this proposed pit that government officials are under the obligation to protect public safety. I've heard some of these delegations, not all of them.
That's your time, Joyce.
Okay, that has not been proven. Therefore, we recommend that on April 4th, or actually now, you vote against the zoning change. Thanks so much for listening to me. I really appreciated the opportunity to speak.
Thanks for coming out and speaking. Thank you. Our next speaker is Greg Castor.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and fellow Wilmot councilors and fellow Wilmot residents.
Welcome, Greg. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Greg Castor, and along with my wife, Luann, we live at 1547 Huron Road, which is in the Heritage Hamlet of Rosebank. We live approximately 2.5 kilometers from where the gravel pit will be put if it were to pass. And I'd like to just direct my comments to the impact of the truck traffic after it has left this proposed pit. Since the trucks will leave the pit and head east on Whitmer Road towards Regional Road 12, at that point they would either turn north or head south. If they head south, they would likely head towards Huron Road and turn left at the Dundee Country Club on their way into Kitchener. The Huron Road is a heritage road. This is a road that was established 200 years ago from Hamilton to Goderich, and it was never intended to handle the traffic that it now does. There are a number of gravel trucks and transport trucks that now use it. And if we were to add more traffic to the mix, it only makes the situation much worse. The road does not have shoulders, and several cars and trucks each winter find themselves in the ditch. The Huron Road, as was mentioned about Whitmer Road, is a place where many joggers, bikers, cyclists, farm equipment, school buses are all in competition for road space. Today, there were several bikers and several joggers already on the road, and you could tell traffic had to slow to get past them, and sometimes that is not always the case. There have been requests put forward to the township about having speed reduction on this part of the road because of its narrowness and visibility problems. And so far, there's been no action taken on any of those requests. So adding more trucks to the mix would only create more of a dangerous situation. The Huron Road continues to disintegrate at the edges from all the heavy traffic that is now using it. More heavy traffic will only impact its integrity more. I would also like to just briefly address the water table issue. Many of the speakers have spoken about water issues. Having been a resident at this location for over 65 years, I have seen a number of the changes that have taken place, and all of them, not all of them, have been good ones. The water table in this particular area has been affected greatly by pumping out of the Mannheim regional wells. And for several farms and homes, this meant that their wells went dry, despite assurances from the region that they had not affected the wells in this area. So I'm not one to really believe assurances when they're given without any backup to say what will happen if that situation were to occur. I have a concern that gravel extraction so close to the water table will also result in a negative impact, just like the well drilling in Mannheim has impacted us. Despite assurances, I'm not convinced that there will not be problems created. In conclusion, I would just ask that the Wilmot Township Council oppose the Jackson Harvest Farm proposal for the creation of a gravel pit in Wilmot Township. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. No questions? Councillor Fanning?
Thank you. The question was not for the delegate, but to the clerk. Ms. Middleholtz had mentioned that one of the intended delegates tonight, Catherine Young, had provided her statement in writing, and I don't believe that I have seen that. In between speakers, I did a quick search and I don't have it on my email. Could it be circulated to us?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Yes, I will see that it gets circulated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've been here for 2 hours now. I think it's time we did a bio break. So we'll do a 10-minute bio break and we'll be back close to 9:15. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Let's continue with our delegations. Our next delegation is John Reiner. Welcome, John.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name's John Reiner. I live at 2044 Sandhills Road. I'm a broiler chicken farmer with about 200,000 chickens, all in Wilmot Township. I'm actually currently shipping chickens right now, so I'm going to make this short and sweet because I got to get back to work. So my main concern is I built a new barn in 2019. It holds 55,000 chickens. It's located at 1974 Sandhills Road. This farm was not included in the agricultural impact assessment because it wasn't there yet. The water impacts of this proposed pit could be absolutely devastating, as these chickens are consuming 18,000 liters per day. This new barn also heavily relies on water for cooling, as warm temperatures in the summer don't go the best for chickens. So I guess my question is, Mr. Esba prepared to guarantee my livestock will not be affected? And if it is, will there be any compensation? The air quality caused by the pit is also a concern of mine. I'd just like to reiterate all of Al Drost's concerns he spoke of earlier, that negative effects of the air to our livestock. And then I'd just like to touch on the history of our farm. I'm the third generation that has been going here in Wilmot. I've got 3 young boys of my own. I hope that they would like to farm with me someday, I hope. Outside of that, I'd like to mention that I did drill 2 wells in the last 3 years, one of which is at my house, and it is only 26 feet deep. So I'd like to think that would likely be affected as well. And I think that's all I've got for tonight. I got to get back to work. So thank you very much for your time. And I hope you guys make the right choice that all of Wilmot residents deserve. So thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you taking the break from work and appreciate you getting some food for us. So
eat chicken.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Our next speaker is Yvonne Zim.
Good evening.
Welcome, Yvonne. Go ahead. We can hear
you.
you. You've got 7 minutes.
Thank you. I'm looking at my notes and I've been kind of striking through as everyone's been speaking because I'm running out of things that can possibly be said that hasn't been said in a better way than I think I possibly can. Anyway, Mayor Armstrong, council members, staff, and anyone participating in this important council meeting. My name's Yvonne Zima. I live in New Hamburg. I've worked locally in the public sector for many years, and I try to be involved in my community because I think it's important. Because this is how we shape our present and we create a future we want to live in. And this is how it should be. You're close to the end of your delegations for the Hallman Pit, and I'm unlikely to bring anything new to light because of the many respected and well-spoken individuals who've come before me. But I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that it's not just the people who are presenting and not just for themselves. Besides those who have stepped forward, there are also those who have no voice. And that includes the four-leggeds, those that land in the ponds, the animals that scurry about that have made this part of their home for, well, long before we had anything to say about it. Now there will be no reversing the destructive changes that will occur to this unique and sensitive water recharge area. There's no returning to the agricultural land if this zone change is approved. I'm grateful to the citizens for Safe Groundwater in particular for putting this application under the microscope where it should be. So I really congratulate council for voting in support of the moratorium for the new gravel pits, so proper study and evaluation can be done. And this could very well be your first test in that regard. So I know you're thinking very carefully about this. I'm going to skip over this. This has been covered. This has been covered. Now, as I mentioned in the letter I previously wrote to council, approving this zone change application, it's like playing Russian roulette with the Shingletown and region of Waterloo residents drinking water. It's not an if situation, it's a when situation. So this prime agricultural land that has over the years been already abused, it's still a unique, sensitive heritage landscape that encompasses the four elements we should be honoring and protecting, not sacrificing for the personal profit and the detriment of everyone and everything else. The threat to the water, land, and air by this speculative business deal will cause further unknown harm. The future is bleak, indeed. Finally, remember, we're all in this together. This is eloquently recognized in the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a tradition of shared responsibility of limited resources. It's read at the beginning of every Wilmot Council meeting, including the one tonight, and I will reiterate it here now. Take only what you need, leave some for others, keep the dish clean. Importantly, there are no knives at this table. Please represent us, your constituents, by voting no to this zone change. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Our next speaker is Sherry Wolf.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you, Sherry. We just can't see you.
Oh.
If you're having a problem with your video, you can go ahead and use your 7 minutes.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. We could hear you before. We just
Can you hear
can't-
me now? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you. We just can't see you. That's all.
The joys of technology. I apologize. So thank you, councilors, Mayor Les Armstrong, and many of those listening from home, and hopefully not Nicole Barn tonight. My name is Sherry Wolf, and I want to voice my objections to the proposed Whitmere Road. I ask you, our council, to uphold your responsibility to represent the township's motto. The applicant's aggregate pit will take more than our township or region needs and leave yet another permanent footprint. Please remember that when I speak tonight, I speak of the cumulative effects of the pit and also of other pits already operating and those that have received approval and are yet to be break ground and are arguably over the threshold as a group to the citizens of Wilmot. Since the application for the proposed zone change on Whitmere Road during the pandemic, citizens worked hard to learn more, and as you can see, Many have said, let's stop and ask more. Thousands have expressed concerns from within Wilmot and outside the township and outside the region, not as a stall tactic as previously implied last week by the opening delegate, but because we care about the future of Wilmot Township and not as that of cafeteria views as suggested. I personally grew up on Whitmere Road, which is attached to the proposed site. My father and stepmother still reside on our family farm. When our family moved to Whitmere Road, 2 stories I recall pertaining to the Lafarge gravel pit. The first one being my dad saying every time I left the house, almost as regular as saying I love you, was watch for the gravel trucks and be careful at the corner. The trucks are coming fast and they're not going to stop for you. Since then, 1 pit has been added and now a proposed 3rd. How many is too many for such a small rural road, not even 2 kilometers road with no shoulders that has families, bus routes, cyclist routes, routes to schools and churches, and offer rich farmlands and food? Why not a 4th or a 5th? Citizens' well-being and safety is what we ask for, not just for the families of Whitmere Road, but those of Shingletown and all of the township. So you can see why I have doubt that the proposed pit will improve the lives, but hinder and endanger us. To the high majority of township roads, understandably, are uncontrolled by traffic lights, making travel safely by car, school bus, foot, or bike risky, with the many diesel gravel pit trucks rumbling through our township, magically with no impacts on noise, road safety, dust, health impacts, and not even touching on the pits themselves impacting, as other delegates have done a great job in going to great detail. When we first moved to Wilmot in 1987 or 88, with the Lafarge pit materializing with the cattle field agreement in place to protect the traffic patterns, habitat rehabilitation, my dad would tell me that once the Lafarge pit closes, it's going to be a beautiful place with grasses and ponds when restored. I pause purposely because I'm now 50 years old myself. And the Lafarge pit has visually from Whitmere Road has moved at a snail's pace and obviously will not return to its natural state in my dad's lifetime or likely even mine. The cattle field or the Ontario Stone and Sand Gravel Association agreements have not been upheld. And how can we ensure that this pit will be no different? No accountability is in place to protect Wilmot townships. So I ask you, why? Why would we expect this applicant to be any different? Why do we need another site if the 2 current pits are slowly extracting gravel at less than 25% capacity? Ask yourself why. Why are the existing gravel pits not running at full capacity? When will they return to farmland? Upon some research, I found the percentage of pits that retire and return to viable farmlands is near 0. Most pit operators prefer to keep these pits open just to avoid remediation cost. What assurances does the applicant provide any different than any other pit operator? It's all about profit, not about rehabilitation. It never has been and it never will be. I would like to speak briefly with the impacts and references to the EPA that specifically prohibit the discharge of contaminants to the environment. If the discharge causes or may cause adverse effects, Ontario Regulation 419/05 contains a similar clause regarding adverse effects. No person shall cause or permit to be caused the emissions of air contaminants such as to the extent or degree as may cause discomfort to a person, cause loss or enjoyment of normal use of property, interfere with normal conduction of business, cause damage to property. In my opinion, the rezoning of the property would impede on all of the above. For all the reasons, your responsibility and stewardships are to protect the people. What will you do to ensure that? What I ask of you tonight is to say no to the rezoning of the property on Whitmere Road proposed. You're not required to say yes because the applicant checked his boxes. You're required to say no if you've not been able to check all of the boxes of the impacts, understanding of all the studies, unanswered questions for safety, legal concerns, etc., of the citizens who have entrusted you. After all the information you've been provided since the commencement of the application, if you can say 110% that you're certain that one more gravel pit in Wilmot Township, or maybe more, cannot hurt our families' well-being, health, and the well-being of the township's farmland and agriculture, proceed with voting. But I ask, if you say no, if you have doubts, then vote no. We all hope that our legacy is positive and meaningful, and I hope as a council you can collectively say that the people of Wilmot Township matter first, and vote no. The township entrusts you, and thank you for your investment in our future and that of our family's future. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you for speaking. So our next speaker is Jack Eva.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, that delegation has advised that he had a conflicting commitment, and he's been encouraged to provide written comment, but has not yet.
Thank you. Then we shall go to Lisa Fabeck, sorry.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Lisa. We just can't see you, but you can go ahead for your 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor and Wilmot Council, my name is Lisa Fabeck. Our family of 6 moved to Petersburg in February of 2020. My husband and I came out to the area a number of times before we purchased. It's such a beautiful place. It's so quiet and serene. This is where we wanted to retire. So we purchased the property at 2138 Whitmer Road. This is our dream home. This is our retirement. This is our family home. Our home is 1.5 kilometers from the proposed gravel pit. We have a private well on the property that is approximately 310 feet deep. My husband has a safety critical position of engineer conductor with the local railway. His job requires that he has at least 8 hours of rest before attending for his shift. If the proposed gravel pit is approved under this proposal, my husband will not get the required minimum 8 hours of rest that his job requires, with a nuisance of vibration from rock crushers and noise that would not allow him to sleep during the day. For us, that would mean that my husband would not be fit for duty for his job. This would cause us financial hardship if he was unable to attend for his job due to a nuisance of noise and vibration. As a landowner, homeowner, we have the right to unfettered use and enjoyment of our property. Having a nuisance of noise, dust, and vibration of an adjacent property will cause us not only financial hardship, but will also wear on our mental health and well-being. Pardon me. It will also prevent us from growing our own food on our property. We have been growing our own vegetables and fruit for the past 2 years. Will our garden vegetables be able to be eaten by my family if they're covered in silica dust? I would like to propose a question not only to the applicant, but also to the mayor and council. Would you live next door to a gravel pit? If you were living on Whitmer Road or in Shingletown and did your research like the rest of the Wilmot community has done, would you not fight for the best possible outcome, which is to say no to the gravel pit going in our backyards? I also have a question for the applicant. Could you not propose a license or operating lease agreement to the other 7 gravel pits in the area and propose that you use their already open and operating gravel pits to help your cause? I ask this because there are other options than putting the gravel pit on Whitmer Road. Why not try to work with the Wilmot community who is saying no to your proposal? There are other options. We just have to think outside the box, where we can meet in the middle and both sides can win. The community is saying no to your proposal means that we care about what happens here. We care about our neighbors, our friends, and our community. My family and I oppose this application. Thank you, Mayor Armstrong and council, for taking the time to hear us, your neighbors, your friends, voters, taxpayers, and members of the Wilmot community. Thank you for hearing me tonight.
Thank you, Lisa. So our next speaker is Steph Gertz.
Good evening.
Welcome, Steph. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. So I'm a resident of Wilmot Township. I'm also here as a board member of the Food Systems Roundtable of Water the Region. So I've spent approximately 3 years following and participating with Citizens for Safe Groundwater as a volunteer or as just a citizen following them. I am actually astounded by the amount of time and energy this community has put together and the number of experts this community has paid for in order to show the errors in the applicant's application. It has also been astounding how much our community has had to fight to be heard and for these independent expert reports to be recognized as valid and taken into consideration. An example of this is the errors identified with the air quality report, which only showed a AQR, as well as errors that our independent expert has identified with the well water testing. And there's numerous other ones. I won't go into that. You've already heard so many people testify on this and give their own expert advice or expert feedback. But this has shown to many in the community how flawed this process is. It would be appreciated that after this, if the township can actually meet with the numerous members of the community that have spent 3 years gathering and submitting research and reports and working with independent experts to determine how these residents have felt. I think that this has created a tension and has really identified a void in our community that's wanted to have a voice, has wanted to be heard, have spent so long trying to make an impact in our community. And I think there needs to be a better process for this afterwards. But so there's already been so much research and testimonies given. I don't need to update any of that. There's been so much given today, so much given last week, and so much given over the last 3 years by Citizens for Safe Groundwater and numerous other people. Everything council needs to make the decision to say no to this application has already been said. And some of it, and much of it, has been very underappreciated. Some community members have spent weeks doing research, and some up to 7. Some have spent weeks doing research, some have spent years doing research, and they've presented for their 7-minute time presentation. And they presented, and then they've been thanked, and then they've been sent along their way. You know, so much research has been done with the hopes that council would ask a question, even one question, and really appreciated the amount of time and effort these citizens have put into this. It's not because they've done this for their own glory or their own ambition. It's because they desperately believed that what they were doing was helping our township, that what they believed that they were doing would resonate with you and connect with you, and perhaps even have you ask one question, which hasn't really happened because, yes, we have so many of us here, and I understand we can't ask a lot of questions for people, and we can't, but just because we run out of time. But you know, looking forward to this in the future, how can we appreciate our community coming together and rallying and creating a better community? Yeah, I don't need to go more into this, but all the research and testimonies that you've already have before you has been said over the last years, but the community is watching and they will stand with you as you say no to this application. Other municipalities across Ontario have said no to rezoning such as this. And this is not outside the box of what we're asking you to do. There's a strong belief that no matter what, this will go before the Ontario Land Tribunal, especially if you vote no to this land rezoning. We want to let you know that the community will stand with you and together through this process. Through my research, I've seen numerous times when the Ontario Land Tribunal has rejected aggregate applications if municipal council has also rejected the zoning. This is less likely to happen. The minister is less likely to reject the application if the council doesn't say no with the community. So please know that our decision is extremely important to the rest of Water the Region who is watching this decision. It not only impacts Shingletown, Wilmot Township, but the whole region. We need to protect our water. We need to protect our farmland. We need to protect our ecosystems and our communities. And as you protect these things, we will stand with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Mr. Rick isn't here. Okay. So that concludes our delegations. So you have a recommendation before you. And we're going to ask the clerk to read the recommendation.
That council approves zone change application 11/19 made by Jackson Harvest Farms Limited /IBI Group, affecting part of Lot 10 concession south of Bleams Road, being Part 1, Plan 58R-19981, to rezone the subject lands as follows. 1. In part from Zone 1 (agricultural) to Zone 14 (extractive industrial), with site-specific provisions requiring post-restoration uses to comply with the terms of the Risk Management Plan 00051 as approved and or amended by the Region of Waterloo. 2. In part from Zone 1 (agricultural) to Zone 11 (open space), with site-specific provisions limiting uses to an arboretum, wildlife sanctuary, and accessory uses. That prior to the third reading of the implementing zoning bylaw, the applicant shall enter into an agreement with the Township of Wilmot to require that prior to commencement of operations and at no cost to the township, Whitmer Road be reconstructed from Queen Street to just west of the proposed pit entrance to the satisfaction of the township. That the township advises the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry that in addition to comments provided by the Region of Waterloo dated November 30th and December 1st, 2021, the following amendments are required in relation to the ARA plans. 1. General Operation Note 2A shall be amended to clarify that prior to commencement of shipping activities, the pit entrance shall be paved from the limit of asphalt on Whitmer Road to, at minimum, the weigh scale, and that the weigh scale shall include a grizzly screen at its approach. 2. General Operation Note 2B shall be amended by adding a sentence preceding the current sentence to indicate that pit traffic will not be permitted west of the entrance on Whitmer Road. 3. The General Operation Note 2C shall be amended to clarify that the farm type gated access from Bleams Road shall not be used for any component of the pit operations and limited to farm access only. 4. General Operation Note 15 shall be amended to align with the peer review noise study as follows. Site preparation, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday. Extraction/processing, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday. 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Saturdays. Shipping, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday. 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. Saturdays.
Thank you. And I will state that I will be voting on this recommendation.
Through you,
Okay.
Mayor Armstrong. We also received a request from a member of council who asked that this vote be recorded.
Yes.
So I will be calling out the members of council when it's time to vote in board order. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So comments, questions? Councilor Gerber?
Yes, through you, Mayor Armstrong. Do you want to move her in a seconder to bring it to the floor, or?
Yes, please.
Okay. To bring it to the floor so we can discuss, I'll move it.
Okay. And seconded by Councilor Fisher. Mr. Gerber, you have any further comment?
I just wanted to get to the floor. I'll fall in line behind the other speakers. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councillor Hallman.
I'm going to kind of ask what might be the best way of going about this because I have a list. So I don't know. I don't want to take all the airtime. I kind of did that in the last meeting. So maybe I will go with a couple of items and then we can kind of see how others. I'm just kind of curious to get the tone of what might be the best way. Maybe the clerk can comment. Not sure what the best way of this is.
If I may, through you, Mayor Armstrong, the procedural bylaw in its last amendment actually gave members of council 5 minutes of, shall we say, airtime.
Okay.
So if we want to sort of think of it in that term, that would probably be helpful.
That is a good reminder and I appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. Middleholtz. So then I guess I'm going to if I have 5 minutes, then I'm going to jump to my most important piece of data that hasn't really been addressed. So through the AMO, there's a document that was released January 13th, 2022. And it was released by Amber Crawford, the senior advisor. And one of the things is it talks about is our dilemma as elected officials when it comes to our responsibility under water. And while I'm aware that this application does not currently request that it goes below the water table, what we don't have the responsibility as elected officials is should that request come later, we don't have a say in that. But we do as elected officials have the responsibility to protect that water. So I ask my colleagues to focus on that as well as your legal responsibility with that and the actions that the AMO is taking with other municipalities and other elected officials to campaign to the province to consider changing that responsibility that we do have. Also, I wanted to draw attention to that some questions that were addressed at the last council meeting, CEO Chambers had said that we would compile that at the end. So I'm not sure if that encompasses my 5 minutes, but maybe she can comment on that.
Yes, through you, Mayor. I believe the Director of Development Services is present and able to answer the list of questions that was provided.
Then I'll mute myself for now and then come back.
Actually, I'll ask Mr. Martin to go ahead. We have prepared it, but
okay. Through Armstrong. So we did compile a list of commonly asked questions through a number of the delegations and provided responses to those. And so I'll go through our point form list here, and hopefully it captures a lot of those questions. I'd first start with respect to Whitmer Road. A number of delegations had expressed some indication that the township would somewhat be on the hook, for lack of a better word, for costs for reconstruction of the road. So the staff report does outline the provisions of the geotechnical study that was completed that outlines what needs to be done to the road to bring it up to a standard to accommodate truck traffic. And subsequently, should the zoning be approved, there would be an agreement implemented to ensure that the costs are completely borne by the applicant. So they'd be responsible to obtain approvals through detailed engineering review and design of the road construction, post securities, and pay the appropriate review fees and deposits to ensure that the road is constructed in accordance with those plans. Some preliminary work was completed to estimate the costs for that, and it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1.8 million was estimated by our Public Works and Engineering Department for that road work. The second piece, specifically to Whitmer Road, was the comment that there was a legal agreement in place with the township to limit gravel pit access to Whitmer Road, specifically the Catalan pit. and previous approvals. Council received the prior planning report on that application from 1991. And within the conditions that were proposed to be included in the M&R license was a limitation on access to Whitmer Road and Huron Road. So it was not a legal agreement with the township. It was actually imposed through the conditions of license approval with M&R, and it was specific to the Catalans pit. And it did not speak to any future applications on other properties along Whitmer Road. Certainly each of those applications was then considered on its own merits. So the next one that came up would have been the Voisin pit, at which time the idea of providing an intra-pit haul route with the Catalans extractive operations was considered in order a way to get access from the Voisin pit out to Queen Street instead of via Whitmer Road. However, due to the timing for the phasing of extraction, it just wasn't deemed to be feasible to do that at the time, and also not having a willing partner to allow for that access to occur were two main reasons that ultimately led to the approval of an access to Whitmer Road. In the case of the current application, in the pre-submission process, staff did suggest that there be consideration given to easements through other properties to gain access out to Queen Street as opposed to Whitmer Road, and ultimately was determined that by the applicant that wasn't a feasible option for them to look at, which then leaves two scenarios to determine access, whether it be to Bleams Road via the existing laneway that accesses Bleams Road in the Shingletown settlement area, or via Whitmer Road. And ultimately, in looking at the impacts and through the traffic analysis, it was determined that Whitmer Road would be the appropriate form of access to the site. And given there's no other options available to provide access to the site, Whitmer Road is what this application proposes, and what's been justified through the prepared and peer-reviewed transportation studies. The next question that has been raised is regarding the restoration to an agricultural condition and ultimately rehabilitation of the gravel pit. There were some suggestions that there wasn't adequate information provided, and ultimately that the peer reviewer from the region of Walloon didn't concur with the findings of the initial applicant's report on restoration to an agricultural condition. Ultimately, what was determined by the region's consultant as well as OMAFRA was that there isn't scientific evidence available anywhere in Ontario to demonstrate that the post-rehabilitation conditions can exist in exactly the same manner as what exists prior to. Ultimately, the only thing that's available within the province of Ontario is the current state-of-the-art and best management practice techniques, and that's an industry standard across the board. So the peer reviewer, the Regional Walloon professional planners, and OMAFRA ultimately concluded that the information that's available and the only information that they can provide was provided in that study, and there isn't the ability to provide scientific evidence beyond what was outlined in this report. And ultimately, a clearance was then provided by the Region of Waterloo on that study. These details are all included within the staff report as well. The component regarding rehabilitation, there was a number of comments regarding the fact that pits are never restored, and certainly all of the pits that are licensed within the Township of Wilmot do have restoration plans, and most of them talk about progressive rehabilitation. Two examples of where that has occurred recently, either at the former Gingrich pit from 1996, the corner of Ty Road and Bean Road. That pit has been fully extracted and fully restored. The other gravel pits of reference would be Tri-Cities pit in Petersburg, just on the west side of Petersburg, both north and south of the railway tracks. Ultimately, the land north of the railway tracks is almost completely rehabilitated now, with extraction having now moved to the south side of the railway tracks. So there are a number of pits that have been pointed to as examples where rehabilitation hasn't occurred, but to say that it hasn't ever occurred in the township wouldn't be an accurate statement with those just two recent examples to draw upon. A number of other comments were made regarding inadequate information to demonstrate conformity with the township official plan, the regional plan, and also more recent comments about provincial policy statement and growth plan conformity. Regarding township OP and the regional plan, certainly the township staff report does demonstrate and go through in detail how the application conforms to the OP, and specifically that an amendment to the OP was not required to support this application. The information demonstrated that there was sufficient information provided to show that there were aggregates available on site to justify the proposed application. The comments made regarding PPS and growth plan conformity don't go into the actual details of the aggregate specific policies. The staff report, we don't specifically speak to PPS and growth plan conformity because our official plan and regional plan are required to conform to those plans. So by virtue of our plans, by virtue of us explaining that the application conforms to township and regional planning documents, would then extend to suggest that conformity exists with both the PPS and growth plan. One comment was made that the studies referenced the PPS 2014 and the growth plan of 2017 as opposed to the 2020 updates. And primarily the reason there hasn't been any comments made on the changes to those plans is because the policies specific to aggregate didn't change in those documents. The one area that was referenced, a should versus shall change, was with respect to general land use compatibility policies. The land use compatibility policies specific to aggregates already include the word shall, and did in the 2014, and that didn't change in 2020. So ultimately, the comment that a should versus shall change has significant impacts is not, in my professional planning opinion, an accurate statement, because the aggregate specific policies already include the word shall, and that didn't change with the update. And that's why ultimately comments weren't made in the planning report about those changes, because the changes did not impact the application before us. The air quality assessment questions that came up were primarily related to information that was provided at the 11th hour. Certainly there was significant review completed, and ultimately a peer review completed by consultants hired by the Region of Waterloo to review the air quality study. Firstly, there was a best management practice regarding dust completed firstly, and then through the review of that document, it was determined that additional information needed to be completed in the form of a detailed air quality assessment and cumulative air quality assessment, which was then completed and peer reviewed by consultants hired by the Region of Waterloo to do so. The information that was raised at the April 4th meeting, or slightly before that meeting, we did not have an opportunity to provide comment in our planning report because that information wasn't made available to us. We have since, though, had a conversation with regional planning staff and their consultants to determine whether the information provided recently changes their initial opinion that ultimately that the air quality study addresses the concerns and ensures that the operation conforms with Ontario Regulation 4/1905, which is air pollution and local air quality. And the conclusion to that conversation was that it does not. The region's consultant is satisfied with the study that was completed and with their peer review, and they do not feel that the comments provided change their ultimate outcome of their review. They do indicate that the review appears to have used some different warrants than what the initial study was done, but ultimately some of the worst case scenarios, including operating without any mitigation measures in place, are not something that should be taken into account because mitigation measures are required as part of this pit operation. So ultimately, the conclusion is that that the original study completed by GHD, peer-reviewed by the region's consultants, indicate that the dust and air quality emissions from this site are mitigated to conform with Ontario Regulation 4/1905, air pollution and local air quality. And the last couple of comments based on some additional questions that were raised tonight. We're specific to wildlife and lack of evaluation to deal with wildlife mitigation and species at risk. Ultimately, there was an EIS completed. The nature of the environmental studies that were completed were based on terms of reference that were prepared and approved by the region's Ecological and Environmental Advisory Committee. Once the reports were completed, they were then subsequently reviewed by that committee, who then made recommendations to professional planners at the region for inclusion in their comments provided to the township and to MNR. Ultimately, there are a number of factors that have been provided in the region's recommendation to MNR with respect to adequate monitoring, separations, and a number of other matters that came up in that study. And the region's EAC committee was satisfied with the environmental work that had been completed in support of this application. And then lastly, a lot of questions, and certainly starting out the process, were comments with respect to water quality and water concerns. And that was actually one of the studies that was has actually been accepted by the region for some time since the application were filed. Sometime before the current report that staff prepared in the application was completed, I should have said. Ultimately, the Region of Waterloo is required to look at all concerns that came up, and they specifically did indicate that in their review of the hydrogeological studies, they did take into account the peer reviews and public comments prior to making the decision that they made, that ultimately it's their opinion that this application wouldn't be detrimental to groundwater, and that significant and sufficient measures are in place to ensure protection of water as a result of this application. Those are the comments and notes I have based on questions. I may have missed some, and certainly I'm here to answer any other questions that I didn't have.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holman, you have a follow-up, or are we going to go?
Yes, I do. So one of the things that I'm still curious about is, so I'm just going to go through my list here from making my notes from the last meeting as well, and weeks and months ahead of time. So just need to find my one specifically for Mr. Martin. So one of the documents that I read was from way in the beginning, and it was in the pre-consultation meeting before the application was submitted. And I read comments that Mr. Martin brought up that Shingletown had concerns for the air quality, but the applicant and their representation didn't see that. And then I'm reading about the ARA saying about the mitigation needing to be on site. And then the community's hired experts addressed the potential impacts as far as Baden, New Dundee, Mannheim, and all of that. I'm just looking to, clearly you had a concern as you brought it up in that pre-application meeting. So can you clarify that further for me?
Theorem Armstrong, I did touch on that in my responses to my questions there regarding air quality. Ultimately, there was a study that was completed. And we did express that as something that needed to be looked at through the pre-consultation stage. So they did a best management practice, and then ultimately that led to a cumulative air quality assessment. The answer from the professionals that prepared the study and the consultants hired by the Region of Waterloo to peer review that study are that the study demonstrates mitigation measures in conformity with the provincial standards, which that regulation was referenced in a presentation today and included in the staff report, and that's specifically Ontario Regulation 4/1905, air pollution and local air quality. So it is the information that we've received from the experts in the field. And they did take into account information that was available at that time as well. And subsequent, like I discussed, did take further account into the information presented at the last council meeting. And ultimately it was their conclusion that mitigation measures are in place to provincial standards at the property line. They did indicate that the information that was provided recently did include some scenarios that aren't reflective of the pit operations as proposed, and ultimately that there was some worst case provisions in place, one being that there are no controls in place at all on the site. So certainly that would have an impact on the ultimate outcome of the study. But the region's consultant and their professionals that provided the clearances to the township ultimately concluded that the study was sufficient to demonstrate conformity with Ontario Regulation 149.05, or 419.05 rather, at the property line.
So further to that, sorry, through the mayor, further to that, we had consultation this evening from other property owners nearby that didn't have poultry operations operating in the thousands of hens. So now that we have this current data, I'm just curious with the air and the water comments with that, how that looks and impacts.
Thierry Armstrong, so the outcome wouldn't change. So the conclusion of the dust and air quality study was that the controls are in place at the property line. So no matter how far away you are, it doesn't change the outcome that they're indicating that mitigation measures are there at the property line with respect to Ontario regulations. The same would go for water impacts. So the region of Waterloo reviewed the Hydro-G study, looking at both municipal and private wells, and indicated that their professional opinion is that there isn't an impact and wouldn't be an impact on groundwater. Sufficient measures being in place to ensure that there aren't impacts, including regular water monitoring, and also provisions in place should conditions change. So ongoing monitoring and the ability to change the operations if circumstances were to change, ultimately is how the region drew their conclusion that there aren't water quality impacts. So the suggestion that two farming operations weren't accounted for in the studies wouldn't change the outcome of what was provided, in that there are anticipated to be no impacts. And that's based on the professional opinions and peer reviews, and taking into account the peer reviews provided by local residents as well.
Okay. My next question is that in Wilmot's OP and the aggregate chapter, it says several times that the applicant's responsibility that there is no environmental impacts. I still hear what you're saying, but I still don't feel like I'm satisfied with the numerous issues that have been identified by the experts that are left out and haven't been answered. How do we protect regional, sorry, not just the regional's water supply, but the private well owners? So many private well owners have constantly said that there's been no evidence to show that should something happen, who's responsible for that?
Thierry Armstrong, respectfully, there were a lot of comments provided through the delegations that it was apparent that perhaps there wasn't a review on their part to all the information that was provided as well. There was a lot of suggestions that the information presented wasn't accurate, but they didn't necessarily provide specifics as to what the studies did and didn't do. What I'm getting at is there's differing opinions out there, and the peer reviewers and comments provided were certainly representing one side of the equation, and the applicants provided their side of the equation, and the peer reviewers hired either by the region of Waterloo and or the Township of Wilmot were impartial in that they're not representing one side or the other. They're to look at both sides of the facts. So staff would suggest that the peer reviews ultimately concluded that there aren't concerns there, and the peer reviews were completed by consultants either on behalf of the region or township, and ultimately didn't have a vested interest in either side of the equation. They were there to determine kind of the impartial evidence per se. And from that perspective, clearances were provided in all aspects of environment and water, and specifically indicated that they had addressed the concerns that were there. So when it comes to water quality, the region of Waterloo did take into account both municipal and private drinking water supply wells, and indicated that those concerns had been addressed. The staff report does go through that specifically with each of the studies, and does specifically comment that the peer reviewers did take into account the information that was provided on behalf of the residents as well. So staff would be of the opinion that those peer reviewers and clearances did take into account all the facts at hand.
Okay, so sorry, through the mayor. I still feel like there's so many outstanding questions that the community has asked. Can I get clarification that you feel that the GRCA and the region and the planning department have satisfied all of the community's answers and questions and received their answers?
Through your Mayor Armstrong, I would suggest as a professional planner that we're not experts in all fields, on all areas, but certainly our area of expertise is to draw upon the expertise of areas in this specific disciplines. And ultimately, based on the facts provided by not just one person or not one party, but taking into account impartial peer reviews completed that suggest that the facts at hand had been taken into account, I would say, yes, the scientific based information that was requested to be looked at and concerns that relate to those any concerns with that scientific information that was provided has been adequately addressed. I don't feel that there is anything at this point based on the studies and peer reviews that were provided. I don't feel like there's outstanding questions that haven't been answered. The answers are not going to always be the answers that people want to hear, but certainly staff would suggest that based on the professionals in those disciplines, both the studies being completed and then the impartial peer reviews that took into account public comments, ultimately concluded and provided clearances in all those scientific based concerns. I would say that from a professional planning standpoint, the township staff came to the conclusion and the recommendation within the report based on the facts at hand. And we are satisfied that the concerns have been addressed in as much as possible.
Okay, and I just had one last one, and then I'll put myself on mute. So with that said, there's a lot of information to be processing. So when it came to the crushers and vibration, that was mentioned by lots of people, and I didn't find any data on that satisfied that question. Can you comment further on that?
Through your Mayor Armstrong, so vibration was actually taken out at the pre-consultation stage as a non-issue in this case because they're not blasting. The crushing operations are taken into account in the noise study, and they aren't considered the vibration standpoint is typically from quarry type activity, not from the type of sand and gravel operation that will be proposed here. So that was looked at the outset of the application, and the professionals at hand indicated that it wasn't something that's required to be further analyzed with respect to this application. But certainly the crushing operations are taken into account. The operating of crushers within the site is limited to certain areas based on the operation plans, and was taken into account in the noise study to ensure that proper mitigation measures were in place to ensure there wasn't an impact. So I would say yes, those questions have been asked and answered.
Councillor Fanning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I want to start by thanking staff, because I know this has been a really difficult process. And well, I appreciate all the work that's gone into trying to do everything you can to satisfy the questions that have been raised. And I want to thank the community, the quality of feedback, the tenor, has been almost exclusively data-based. You know, certainly concerns, and nobody could possibly imagine that living next to a gravel pit would be anyone's first choice. So I hear you. At the end of the day, I'm left with a couple questions. I've written, as I was reading all the reports and listening to all of the comments, I, you know, jotted notes for myself, and I've got like a page and a half of questions and notes. Not going to read them all, don't worry. I can't read that fast in 5 minutes, and it's probably not useful. I'm left with it boils down to a couple things for me. The whole ARA is predicated on the idea that this is a temporary use. And we know that it is, what is temporary? How do you define temporary? 50 years, 100 years? To me, that doesn't fit my definition of temporary. The other aspect about it being a temporary use, if the land is irrevocably and irreversibly changed, then it's not temporary. And I will say, you know, we've heard all the experts, and the process is that there are check boxes. Those check boxes have been satisfied. But maybe those check boxes, maybe we don't have the right check boxes. For me, as a farmer, I know that what is proposed, even though it is considered state of the art, it will not return that space to farmland that is equivalent to what exists today. And the reason that data doesn't exist is because that isn't, it can't be. The final remediated pit floor proposed is, I believe, 358 meters of sea level, which puts it at the lowest point, 8 meters, and up to 18 meters for most of the surrounding land. So most of the surrounding land is either 18 or 8 meters above, higher than it. That it's a hole in the ground. Even if it's level, that is not good farming, not a good farming condition. So it is changed permanently. The other thing is that soil health has only just recently begun to be understood. Soil is life. Without the interconnected web of microorganisms and all of the life that makes soil healthy and vibrant, it sequesters carbon, it cycles nutrients for plants, and it is one of the biggest ways that we can impact climate change is by ensuring healthy soils. So this is not a question to staff, because I know that's you know, not something that is in your area of expertise to answer. But those are the things that I'm left with that are outside of the check boxes that were given to consider. But they're still important, and we have to consider them. And as leaders in this community, we have to be able to consider everything, every way that this impacts our community. specific mitigation measures have already been implemented and are discussed. We could have higher burns, we could have, you know, those things have physical mitigation measures, but at the end of the day, they don't change the end result. If it's 50 years or 100 years from now, it will not go back. It can't go back to what it was before because you've taken something away from it. And so it's changed forever. And as Mark Reeser pointed out, you know, and that's someone who's representing the farming community. The National Farmers Union and the Federation of Agriculture are both asking us not to approve this. And I think I'm probably over my 5 minutes, so I will cede the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Fenning. Councillor Gerber.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. Just a couple comments and then maybe a couple questions as well for clarification. First of all, I know there's been a lot of points made that this is really a township driven. The township has the ultimate decision, all those sorts of things. And while obviously our role in this is key, I mean, the fact that everything needs to conform to a provincial policy statement, that the final approval of the pit is under the Aggregate Resources Act, which will be approved or not approved by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And of course, the potential that this whole thing ends up at the Ontario Land Tribunal, whichever way we vote tonight, does make it in very large part a provincial matter as well, and not just purely a local township matter. Is Mr. Cisco still with us? Is he on the call, I believe? Were we going to be able to ask questions of the applicant? Is that still the case? So Mr. Cisco, just a quick question or two for you, if you have a moment. I just have a couple questions about like concrete, asphalt recycling, aggregate washing, crushing, those sorts of things. When I was reviewing just some information from staff as far as the number of pits currently in the township, how many we've approved in the last 20 years, what changes have been made to those pits and those sorts of things. A couple of things that I noticed were that there were several pits that have added concrete and asphalt recycling, added aggregate washing, added crushing, like further crushing beyond what's needed for extraction. So I just had a question about how crucial those operations are to the actual simple extraction of aggregate, since obviously some pits existed without it and still exist without those uses. And I can sort of review that quick, and it might take you a second to get plugged in, but.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm here with Rick Asbaugh, and I'm going to ask Rick if he could maybe respond to that question.
Sure.
Councillor Gerber, we missed a part of the question as we were chiming in here. So could you?
Yeah, no worries. I was just asking about the role like concrete and asphalt recycling, aggregate washing, further crushing play to the part of the operation that's extracting aggregate. Because I noticed just in talking to staff that we've had several pits in the area that have added concrete and asphalt recycling sort of after the fact, that have added further crushing, that have added aggregate washing. So obviously at one point they didn't have those things and they were still extracting aggregate. And there's other pits that operate without those things either. So I was just curious what role those played in relation to the actual extracting of aggregate.
I think the role of recycling asphalt and concrete is extremely important. I mean, people that drink a water bottle or eat a can of beans go through the effort of peeling the label off, cleaning the beans out of there and carrying it out, putting it in a blue box, taking it out, separating everything. It's not much simpler, not much different than doing that with aggregate, right? In asphalt and concrete coming back. As you replace a road, you replace Snyder's Road here, that asphalt has to go somewhere. We don't want it to go into a garbage dump. We want it to either go back to a facility where we can recycle it and reuse it and save the resource that we don't have to keep coming to council for these meetings. The more we can recycle, the less gravel we need. And this property has, as you probably all know, has a lot of barns on it. It's got a lot of concrete. It needs to be recycled, and that is, I don't know what you do with it if you didn't. Like, I mean, we don't want to bury it. That makes no sense. So
yeah.
Did I answer the question? Is there
Yeah,
anything else?
yeah, I think so. Because I think one of the pits we talked about, the Tri-City pit on Snyder's Road, right, added concrete and asphalt recycling. It looks like in 04, aggregate washing in 06. So it would have existed, without those things prior to that. Is Tri-City involved in the current one? Like, is this a Tri-City pit, or is this a whole separate operation? Jackson Harvest Farms is a separate entity, or no?
It is a separate entity. Tri-City does have the right to the last right of refusal to deal with the royalty on this pit. I was the one that requested the washing permit in 04. I was the one who requested the recycling because I believe in recycling. I take my can out to the corner, to the edge of the street to be recycled. So why wouldn't you do it with concrete and asphalt? As for washing, we might not even need a wash permit on this site. The sand is very clean. And in regards to a lot of the questions today about, there's not enough, or there's too many gravel pits licensed. Well, in Wilmot Township, the Roth pit on Bean Road is at its end. It's going to be rehabilitated. Yeah. The Gingrich pit is being rehabilitated, has been rehabilitated and turned back. In New Dundee, the Sarir pit, there's about 40,000 tons in it that Tri-City had a lease on. And there was a comment made, it was never rehabilitated. When it's below water, it is rehabilitated. All the side slopes of that pit were rehabilitated through Tri-City and through when I worked there. And so that kind of hurts me that those things are out there, and it's not true. The Tri-City pit on Gurmit, the Gurmit pit on Snyder's Road is probably about 40% rehabilitated. That pit is almost empty. And when it is empty, it will be fully rehabilitated in the next 2 years. The Petersburg pit, we talked about earlier in town, on the north side of the tracks is probably 50-60% rehabilitated. In the next year or two, it'll be completely rehabilitated.
Okay, I probably just have two other quick questions, and then that's good. I appreciate your time. Would you say that there's ample capacity for concrete and asphalt recycling at existing pits? Like, do you find people can't find places to recycle concrete and asphalt locally?
No, I would say there's ample
fair enough.
for it. But
and then I guess, and then I guess the last one, several delegations, it seemed, and I don't know if I don't think Citizens with Safe Groundwater is here anymore, but several delegations seem to suggest that Citizens with Safe Groundwater would likely appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council approves the zone change application tonight. May I ask a speculative question? Would you expect as the applicant to appeal if the vote is no tonight? Just sort of curious what might happen next in either scenario.
I would appeal, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, thanks. Those are the questions I had for you, for your group. So thanks for sticking around and answering those. And then I maybe just have a couple more observations. So I would just make an analogy I thought of today is sort of the Ontario Land Tribunal is a bit like video replay, right? Like, we're going to make a decision and then it's going to go to video replay. And I'm not sure, I mean, some might argue that the call in the field is significant. I'm not sure how significant the call in the field is compared to other things, but one of the things that struck me that several of the delegates commented on were the opportunity to perhaps provide some restrictions on what we're going to approve tonight. So for example, Mr. Esbaugh suggested that maybe they don't need wash ponds, that there's ample asphalt and concrete recycling facilities around, maybe no crushing beyond what they need to do to extract the aggregate, that moving in that direction might be a way to sort of saw this thing off in the middle a little bit. And then I got a couple questions for Mr. Okrafka. And I mean, I already got from the delegation or from the applicant, the thoughts that this is likely to be appealed either way. Would that be your sense of this, just based on your experience in these types of discussions?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Councillor Gerber. We've not had a pit appealed in the Township of Wilmot that I'm aware of, at least during my 27 years. Finding middle ground on a pit is a very difficult thing to do. Sides typically are polarized, and I think that's evidence. Obviously, the consultants on both sides of the argument and down the middle don't agree, and that's typically what happens. It's rare that you would go to a OLT, or formerly the OMB or LPAT, hearing and have all the experts on the same side. It would be a fairly quick hearing, and in general, they're not quick hearings. There are a lot of competing professional opinions, and it would, to a certain extent, much of what you've heard over the last number of years would be repeated. And ultimately, a member not from Wilmot would make a decision as to what the best solution for Wilmot is. So finding middle ground on any application is always ideal. Whether it's possible is another thing. I guess if you do find that middle ground that works for everyone, then yeah, you probably wouldn't end up with an appeal. But I don't know if that's an option on this or not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I would say, yeah, appeals are costly, and appeals also run the risk of, one side gets everything they want and the other side gets nothing that they want, because people aren't going to the appeal level to sort of find some sort of a middle ground. So what I'll be proposing, and I know Mr. Councillor Fisher hasn't had a chance to speak. I'm going to be proposing that we eliminate asphalt and concrete recycling. The PPS says that we can't take into account supply and demand for aggregate, but there's nothing that says we can't take into account supply and demand for concrete and asphalt recycling. That would help reduce traffic and a lot of the concerns around the pit. No crushing beyond what's needed for extraction. The applicant himself has said that they could probably get by with no wash ponds, no aggregate washing. And again, that would be, to me, those would be three things that we could, that we sort of, could have some control over here locally and maybe solve the entire issue locally and not have to get to a point where one side, where we go for broke and end up, with the worst case scenario as far as losing at the OLT. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Gerber. Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, and I would like to thank citizens for Safe Groundwater for all their hard work they put into this. They're rallying the citizens, educating us, sharing their opposing views. I'd also like to thank township staff. I know planning department, clerk's department, certainly a ton of workload. And even my colleagues, so a lot of meetings to sit through and digesting a lot of stuff. So certainly has been a huge amount of conflicting information, which to me really does make it difficult for a decision. There's many factors that suggest we should oppose this application. I know the region has no problem approving it, and the township doesn't have a problem. But certainly a lot of the citizens do. And there's certainly a lot of possibility for significant environmental impacts. Fertile farmland will be lost. To me, the close proximity to Shingletown, like 113 residents there, I think their lives are just going to be changed dramatically. And I know last week we had to take a trip down to Dorchester, and on the way down, I kind of looked to the left, and I thought, or the right, actually, sorry. And I thought, what is with all that dust over there? And turns out we're driving by the Lafarge plant. You could barely see the plant from the dust. And I don't know, to me, over the course of the 3 years or 3 terms I've been here, my mission's really been to listen to and understand the people, act in their best interest. Personally, I wouldn't want to live next to a gravel pit. And I'm going to be opposing the zone change tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Anyone else wish to comment at this time? Then I will comment. And I too want to congratulate the residents of Wilmot Township and their tenacity to oppose this. And I think that, I think the work that's gone into this is kind of unprecedented with a decision that Township has been asked to make. And I'm truly impressed with the hard work that they put in. I know staff have put in a hard work, and I know that the applicant has done so as well. But, I think in my mind, we're here to represent the people. And of all the information we've received, I think I've received maybe 2 comments in favor from citizens of Wilmot Township. And I understand that that's probably going to be quite normal no matter what. But what I do see is the passion and desire of the people to have us hear them, hear their concerns. And I don't think that, unfortunately, in my mind, I don't think that any compromise that we come up with at this point is going to lessen their concerns. Certainly we can try and make it less of a problem for them, but I don't think that they will see it as. And as has been stated in the past, that we should be listening to the people of the residents of Wilmot Township. That hasn't always happened, but I think we need to make sure that they are heard. And for that reason, I will not be supporting. Councillor Fenning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Just one more thing that I wanted to say. And I would have liked to say it when the applicant was on here. I don't think that he's a bad person. I don't think that Mr. Esbaugh applying for a gravel pit, this zone change or a gravel pit license makes him public enemy number 1. What we have is a problem with the system, and that's not his fault. It's not his responsibility to fix, it's ours, at least to begin to try to fix it, at least to begin to try to address it. And so, as much as I'm saying thank you to staff, I want to also say thank you to Mr. Esbaugh for having done his best to meet the regulations to address the concerns. We have a problem with the way we go about assessing these things, and I think that's what this whole conversation has been about.
Thank you, Councillor Gerber.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Director of Development Services. And again, maybe calls for some speculation, and I'm not expecting you to go out on a limb in any way, shape, or form. But your thoughts on what are the implications of an appeal for the township, as far as if we were to vote yes, and then we're defending an appeal from Citizens for Safe Groundwater versus us voting no and I guess defending an appeal against the applicant. Is there a difference in the amount of jeopardy there? And then I guess, yeah, I have one follow-up, but maybe I'll just stop there.
I don't think I can answer that question. I think that would be a question for the township solicitor who would be charged with defending the decision of the township council on this matter.
All right. So they're expensive either way. Do we know that much?
Gravel pit appeals are very expensive. I think my understanding from Woolwich, who actually regularly has OLT hearings, OMB hearings, LPAT hearings on gravel pits, they budget in the vicinity of anywhere from, I believe, $150,000 to $400,000 per appeal. But that shouldn't be the decision maker on. Like, I throw that number out just so you can apprappreciate the cost, but I'm not saying that that's a determinant on whether you vote yes or no. I just want to make sure that's clear, and I don't want to be accused that the director saying make a decision based on money.
No, it's about. Not holding you to anything. The other question I would ask is on defending a no. Is there any parts of the agreement that are at risk? For example, like I note things like, hey, there's some road reconstruction in there. There's some, hey, they're going to pave up to this scale. You know, like some of the things that have sort of been back and forth to, you know, try to ameliorate some of the impacts of the operation. Do those remain part of what's being appealed, or does it go back to square one and it's sort of the gloves are off? I'm just any precedent to know? I know not for us because we've never got to this point, but I would defer to the township. I just want to avoid a worst case scenario. I mean, I want to avoid us leaving here thinking, hey, we've listened to the people and we've voted no. And, you know, 8 months from now, we end up with a worst case scenario than we would have had if we maybe tried to find something workable. That's all I want to exhaust before we vote.
Through Mayor Armstrong, Councillor Gerber, again, that would be a question for the township solicitor, I believe. From a staff perspective, the regional staff clearances, the GRCA clearances, the township staff reports all would be revisited by OLT, but it wouldn't change the professional opinions that have been expressed to date. So the council decision does not change the professionals involved in the process. They would just be re-adjudicated in a different chambers, if that explains it.
Yeah, but would they be voting? Is the OLT voting on the package we have tonight? Like, are they saying this package should? Or
it would be considered, but my understanding is that it's a hearing de novo, or what the proper term is. But all the facts would be considered, and certainly there may be things that would be gained, or obviously, if you vote no, the gain would be that it's not approved. So it would be different than what's in front of you tonight, depending on the outcome of the hearing.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I want to follow up on Councillor Fenning's comments that Mr. Espa, as far as I'm concerned, he's probably in the upper level of operators that he does take a lot of stuff into consideration that some don't. And that's part of the problem of being in a group of people where not everybody is of the same stripe. So at this point, I think we shall call the question. Councillor Gerber.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to propose a friendly amendment that we consider removing references to asphalt and concrete recycling, references to crushing aggregate, and references to wash ponds, and also ask the province for a sunset clause for this particular pit prior to voting on the recommendation. And obviously, I guess if there's no seconder for those suggestions, they will not happen, but I want to make them.
And there was no seconder. So, okay. So, Madam Clerk, you may begin your recorded vote, please.
Yes, through Mayor Armstrong. So I'll begin with Ward 1. Councillor Hallman, please indicate yay or nay.
Nay for Ward 1.
Thank you. Okay, Ward 3, Councillor Barry Fisher. Yay or nay?
Nay for Ward 3.
Thank you. Councillor Jeff Gerber, Ward 4. Yay or nay?
I'll make it unanimous despite my misgivings. I'll vote nay.
Okay. Ward 4, Councillor Jennifer Fanning. Yay or nay?
Nay.
Okay. And Mayor Les Armstrong. Yay or nay?
Nay.
Nays have it. Thank you.
Councillor Gerber, you have a comment.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear, my misgivings were not for protecting the groundwater or listening to the citizens. My misgivings are just that we might be creating a situation with an ultimately worse outcome. Those are my only misgivings. If we are successful in stopping this at the local level, we will have done an important thing for the province, and ideally that's the case. That's all.
Well, that's something we can only hope. I mean, the fact that there is a movement afoot to put a moratorium on and revisit the Aggregate Act, I think that's a step in the right direction, and hopefully that will occur. Okay, so that takes care of that for tonight, and now we need to confirmatory bylaw and read the recommendation, please, Madam Clerk.
That bylaw number 2022-16 be read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council.
Thank you. Have a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Fanning, seconded by Councillor Gerber. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And one last recommendation for adjournment.
That we do now adjourn to meet again at the call of the mayor.
And that is moved by Councillor Hallman, Councillor Fanning, Councillor Fisher, and seconded by everybody. So all in favor? Cool. Everybody only put up one hand. That's good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.